5 days after I gave birth to twins, my mother-in-law showed up at my hospital room with my husband's mistress and a set of divorce papers. "Take $34 million and sign it," she told me. "I only want the kids." I signed those papers and disappeared that very night. By morning, she realized that something had gone terribly wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and my entire career as a forensic accountant has trained me to spot lies hidden in numbers. But nothing could have prepared me for the lies hidden in my own marriage. The heavy oak door of my VIP maternity suite at Atlanta Medical Center swung open without a simple knock. I was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed holding my 5-day-old twins Leo and Aria. My body was still aching from a complicated delivery. I looked up expecting to see a nurse bringing in fresh towels. Instead, my mother-in-law Eleanor marched into the room. She was wearing her signature tweed designer suit, her posture rigid, her diamonds catching the harsh fluorescent light, and her eyes absolutely cold. Right behind her was my husband Marcus. Clinging tightly to his arm was Chloe, his 24-year-old former executive assistant. I felt a sudden drop in my stomach, a cold wave of realization washing over me, but I forced my breathing to remain completely steady. Eleanor did not even glance at her newborn grandchildren. She marched straight to the foot of my bed and threw a thick stack of legal documents onto the pristine white sheets. Right on top of the heavy paper stack sat a cashier's check. The numbers printed on it were staggering. $34 million. "Sign the papers!" Maya Eleanor commanded, her voice echoing off the sterile walls of the hospital suite. She told me to take the $34 million and leave Atlanta forever. She demanded I leave the babies there. She said that Marcus and Chloe were getting married next month, and the sterling heirs would be raised by someone who actually respects this family's legacy and understands their social standing. She told me I did not belong in their world, and honestly, I never did. I looked at Marcus, the man I had loved and supported for 4 grueling years. The man whose messy financial ledgers I had quietly fixed month after month to keep his mother from discovering his failures. He could not even meet my eyes. He stood cowardly behind his mother's imposing figure, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot like a reprimanded schoolboy. "I am sorry," Maya, Marcus muttered finally, looking at a spot on the floor just past my shoes. He said Chloe just understands him better. He claimed she does not stress him out with budgets and spreadsheets the way I do. He said she lets him breathe. I looked at Chloe, who was wearing a smug, triumphant smile. She was clutching a designer handbag that I knew for an absolute fact was purchased with a corporate credit card I had repeatedly warned Marcus to stop using. They thought they had me perfectly cornered. For 4 years, Eleanor had treated me like a charity case, constantly reminding everyone at her country club galas that a girl from a public school in South Atlanta had no business sitting at the table with the elite Sterling family. She thought my quiet demeanor meant I was weak. She thought my patience was a sign of submission. She truly believed that $34 million would be enough to buy my silence and purchase my own flesh and blood. A normal woman might have screamed. A normal mother might have broken down into hysterical tears right then and there, begging her husband to stay, pleading with her mother-in-law to keep her family intact for the sake of the newborns. But my tears had dried up months ago. They dried up the moment my forensic accounting software flagged the unexplained wire transfers to a luxury apartment leased in Chloe's name. I had known about the affair for a long time. I just had not realized they would be brazen enough to ambush me while I was still bleeding in a hospital bed. I did not cry. I moved with slow, deliberate precision. I gently placed Leo and Aria into their matching hospital bassinets, making sure their tiny heads were perfectly supported. I smoothed their soft cotton blankets, kissed their warm foreheads, and turned back to face the 3 people who thought they had just ruined my life. I picked up the heavy gold pen Eleanor had tossed onto the bed alongside the divorce documents. I let my gaze slowly travel from Marcus, who was visibly sweating, to Eleanor, who stood with her chin raised in arrogant defiance, and finally to Chloe. I stared directly at Chloe's perfectly flat stomach, letting a chilling, knowing smile spread across my face. I saw her falter immediately. Her smug expression slipped for just a fraction of a second as she shifted uncomfortably under my intense gaze, stepping slightly behind Marcus's shoulder. She had no idea what I knew, but my smile terrified her. I looked back down at the check, then up at the woman who had made my life a living hell since the day I married her son. "I will sign your papers, Eleanor," I said, my voice steady, professional, and deadly calm. "But I do not take checks." I told her to wire the money directly into my account right now, or she could take her mistress and her paperwork and get out of my room. Eleanor scoffed, her eyes narrowing as she pulled her phone from her designer handbag. She was so blinded by her own arrogance and her desperate need to control the Sterling bloodline that she did not hesitate for a single second. She dialed her private wealth manager right there in the room. You see, Eleanor assumed my demand for a wire transfer was just the greedy impulse of a poor girl desperate for cash. She had absolutely no idea that as a forensic accountant, I knew exactly what that specific $34 million represented in her offshore portfolio. She had no clue that by forcing this money into my hands, she was handing me the only clean liquidity her entire corrupt empire had left. I stood silently holding the gold pen, waiting for the trap to spring. Before I could even click the pen, the heavy suite door swung open again. Jessica paraded into the room. She was Marcus's sister-in-law, married to his older brother David, and she wore her entitlement like a weapon. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, and her heels clicked against the linoleum floor with an arrogant rhythm. She crossed her arms, looking at me with the exact same condescending smirk she had worn for the past 4 years. She looked at the paperwork on the bed, then at the check, and let out a sharp laugh. "You should take the check," Jessica said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. $34 million is a staggering amount of money. Let us be brutally honest here. A girl who grew up in the public housing projects of South Atlanta could work 5 lifetimes and never see a fraction of that wealth. Your entire bloodline combined will never generate what Eleanor is generously offering you to simply walk away. You should be down on your knees thanking this family for buying you out so cleanly. I did not break eye contact with her. I just stared at her pale, perfectly moisturized face. Jessica had always been the gatekeeper of the Sterling family's social standing. She was the one who made sure everyone knew I did not belong. She was the one who orchestrated the seating charts at the annual country club galas. For 4 consecutive years, while Jessica and Chloe sat at the head tables, drinking vintage champagne with the governor and the mayor, I was deliberately seated near the kitchen doors at the overflow tables. I was placed next to the coat check, treated like the family's unfortunate charity case that they were forced to tolerate. Jessica stepped closer to the hospital bed, wrinkling her nose as if my very presence offended her. She glanced at the bassinets where Leo and Aria were sleeping, then looked back at me with absolute disdain. "You really thought you could trap Marcus with these babies, did you not?" Jessica taunted. "You thought popping out twins would secure your place at the estate. But the Sterling legacy is about pedigree. It is about breeding and refinement. Marcus made a mistake marrying a glorified bookkeeper, but Chloe is going to fix that. Chloe belongs in our circles. You just belong in the background balancing the checkbooks. So grab the piece of paper, take the money, and go back to the ghetto where you make sense." Her words hung in the air, heavy with racist microaggressions and unchecked privilege. Eleanor nodded in agreement, a triumphant glint in her eyes. Chloe smiled wider, practically leaning her head on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus stared firmly at the floor, too cowardly to defend the mother of his newborn children against his sister-in-law's venom. They all waited for me to break. They expected me to scream, to throw the water pitcher at Jessica's head, or to burst into humiliated sobs. They wanted me to confirm every stereotype they held about me. Instead, I gently laid the gold pen back down on the sterile hospital tray. I looked past Jessica and fixed my gaze entirely on Eleanor. "I already told you," I said, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I do not take checks. A check can be canceled. A check can be tied up in litigation. A check leaves a paper trail in a domestic account that your lawyers will immediately freeze the moment I walk out of this hospital. If you want my signature on these divorce papers, and if you want me to surrender my rights to the Sterling name, the transaction will be executed my way. Eleanor bristled, her jaw tightening. You are in no position to negotiate, Maya. I am the only one in a position to negotiate. I shot back instantly. You want me gone today. You want Marcus to marry Chloe next month before the social season begins. You want these babies raised by a woman who matches your country club aesthetic. If you want all of that to happen seamlessly, you will wire the $34 million directly into an offshore account. I reached over to my hospital bedside table, opened my leather planner, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I handed it directly to Eleanor. That is the routing information for an irrevocable trust established in the Cayman Islands, I instructed clearly. An irrevocable trust means that once the funds clear, they cannot be clawed back by you, your board of directors, or any federal court in this country. The money becomes entirely autonomous. You will wire the funds right now. I will watch the bank confirmation clear on my secure server. Once the liquidity is verified and untouchable, I will sign your divorce papers. Jessica let out a loud, mocking gasp. You are out of your mind. Eleanor, do not listen to this street trash. She is trying to extort you. Eleanor held up a hand, silencing Jessica instantly. Eleanor stared at the routing numbers on the paper. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was a billionaire. To her, $34 million was a drop in the bucket, a minor inconvenience fee to eradicate a stain on her family portrait. She did not know that her massive real estate empire was heavily over-leveraged. She did not know that the $34 million sitting in her primary operating account was the exact collateral holding her entire house of cards together. As her hidden bookkeeper, I knew every single financial secret she possessed. Eleanor reached into her designer purse and pulled out her encrypted banking device. She dialed her private wealth manager. Her eyes locked onto mine with pure, unadulterated hatred. Execute a direct international wire, Eleanor commanded, into the phone reading off the Cayman Islands routing numbers I had provided. Yes, the full $34 million. Yes, an irrevocable trust. Authorize it immediately. Override the standard holding period. I want the transfer completed right this second. She lowered the phone, her diamond rings catching the light as she gripped the device. She looked at me with a sneer so vile it could have stripped paint off the walls. You are a gold digger, Maya. Eleanor sneered, hitting the final confirmation button on her screen. Just like I always said you were. The room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the monitors and the soft breathing of my newborn twins. I kept my eyes locked on Eleanor, refusing to let her see a fraction of the physical agony radiating from my surgical incision. Jessica scoffed loudly from the corner, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. She muttered to Marcus that this was a waste of time and that Chloe had a luxury bridal fitting at noon. Marcus just stared at his leather loafers devoid of a spine. He was the weak man I had spent 4 years covering up for hiding his reckless spending from the board. Then the sharp chime of a notification echoed from my phone. I picked the device up slowly. The encrypted banking application glowed with a fresh alert. An international wire transfer for $34 million had successfully settled into the Cayman Islands Trust. The funds were completely detached from the Sterling enterprise, cleansed of their toxic origins, and irrevocably sealed under my sole control. I placed the phone face down. Eleanor did not waste a single second. She snatched the thick stack of legal documents from the foot of the bed and shoved them directly against my chest. The heavy paper cut into my skin through the thin hospital gown. Sign it, Eleanor commanded, her voice vibrating with impatience. Every single page. Relinquish your maternal rights. Surrender the Caldwell name. Give Marcus full legal custody and walk out of this hospital with your offshore blood money. I want you gone before my luncheon begins. I picked up the gold pen. I flipped through the heavy pages, scanning the dense legal jargon. They drafted it perfectly to ensure I would be erased from my children's lives. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed the first page, then the second. Chloe leaned forward, a triumphant giggle escaping her lips as she whispered to Marcus that they could finally decorate the nursery. I reached the final page, the absolute surrender of all maternal claims. As I moved to sign, I intentionally hooked my elbow under the heavy hospital blanket. With a sharp, calculated jerk of my arm, I yanked the blanket upward. The entire stack of legal documents slipped from the tray and scattered across the sterile linoleum floor. Eleanor shrieked in frustration, cursing my clumsiness. Jessica rolled her eyes and stepped back, refusing to ruin her designer heels by bending down. Marcus stood frozen, entirely useless. "Look what you did!" Chloe whined, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You cannot even sign a piece of paper without making a mess." I ignored them all. I gritted my teeth against the searing pain in my abdomen, leaning over the side of the bed. My hands, trained by years of forensically auditing thousands of pages of fraudulent corporate ledgers, moved with lightning speed and precision. I had spent countless nights tracking Marcus's hidden debts, learning exactly how to manipulate the paper trail his family created. I swept the scattered papers into a neat pile. My right hand slipped beneath the mattress edge, retrieving a perfectly folded sheet of legal paper I had taped there 3 days ago. It was a document I drafted myself, matching their exact formatting, font, and margins. In one seamless motion, I slid their final page under the bed frame and slipped my own page at the bottom of the stack. I signed my name with a flourish. I sat back up, breathing heavily, holding the perfectly aligned stack of papers out to Eleanor. She snatched them from my hands with vicious force. She did not bother to read the final page. People like Eleanor never read the fine print when they believe they have already won. They are too blinded by their own supreme arrogance and entitlement. She flipped straight to the bottom, saw my signature, and shoved the entire stack into her leather briefcase, snapping the gold clasps shut with a resounding click. "It is done," Eleanor declared, looking down at me as if I were dirt on her shoe. "The Sterling family is officially cleansed of your presence. You have your money. Now get out." I did not move. I simply adjusted my gown and looked at my babies sleeping peacefully in their bassinets. Jessica laughed cruelly, linking her arm through Chloe's. "Come on, Chloe," Jessica chirped loudly. "Let us go call the estate manager and have Maya's cheap clothes thrown into the incinerator. I do not want her poor energy lingering in the house when you move in." Eleanor turned to her son, her tone shifting to absolute command. "Marcus, gather the twins. We have a private pediatric transport waiting downstairs. Do not let her touch them again." Marcus finally moved forward. He took a hesitant step toward the bassinets, refusing to look at my face. He reached his hands out to grab my newborn son. He thought he was walking away with his children, his new mistress, and his family wealth perfectly intact. But before his fingers could even brush the edge of the plastic crib, a deafening sound echoed from the hallway. Heavy, synchronized footsteps stomped against the tile, shaking the walls of the maternity suite. The door to my room did not just open, it was shoved completely off its hinges. 4 massive private security contractors dressed in full black tactical gear stormed into the room. Their combat boots pounded the floor, their imposing presence instantly sucking all the oxygen out of the suite. They moved with terrifying speed, their hands resting near their tactical belts, forming an impenetrable solid wall of muscle directly between Marcus and my babies. Marcus stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Chloe let out a terrified shriek and hid behind Eleanor. Eleanor froze her mouth, hanging open in shock, completely unable to process the sudden shift in absolute power. Marcus lunged forward, his face twisting from pale shock to flushed rage. He reached his hands out, his fingers desperately grazing the edge of the plastic bassinet holding my son. The lead security contractor, a man easily 6'4" with a stern and unyielding expression, stepped squarely into his path. The contractor planted a massive hand flat against Marcus's chest and shoved him backward with a brutal force that sent my soon-to-be ex-husband crashing into the rolling hospital tray table. A pitcher of water pitched across the floor, and Chloe shrieked, jumping back erratically to avoid getting her designer heels wet. "Get your hands off me!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with a frantic, unhinged energy that I knew all too well. "Those are my children. You cannot keep me from my own flesh and blood." Eleanor recovered her voice, her regal composure fracturing into shrill indignation. "Do you have any idea who we are?" she demanded, glaring at the lead guard while furiously adjusting her tweed jacket. "I will have you all arrested. I will have this entire hospital shut down. Marcus, call the police right now." The lead contractor did not even blink. He reached into his tactical vest and withdrew a thick, crisp legal document folded in thirds. He snapped it open and held it directly in front of Marcus's face. "Marcus Sterling." The guard stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that commanded absolute compliance. "You have been served with an emergency court-approved restraining order. It was signed by a Fulton County judge exactly 1 hour ago. You are legally required to maintain a distance of 500 feet from Maya Caldwell and her minor children. If you do not vacate this room immediately, you will be detained and handed over to federal marshals." Jessica scoffed loudly from the corner, crossing her arms defensively. A restraining order based on what she sneered, her elitist arrogance flaring up. Maya is a nobody. No judge in Atlanta would sign an emergency order against a Sterling without absolute proof. Based on documented chronic substance abuse and erratic behavior, the guard read aloud, his cold eyes never leaving Marcus. Marcus went entirely still. The bluster drained completely from his posture, replaced by genuine terror. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading. I stared back, completely unbothered, securing the heavy safety straps on Leo's carrier. For the last 2 years, while Eleanor thought I was just sitting quietly at home playing the obedient wife, I was pulling the banking records of Marcus's secret cash withdrawals. I had tracked every single late-night wire transfer to his discreet dealers, every stint in luxury rehabilitation facilities that Eleanor had desperately tried to write off as executive wellness retreats. I had quietly compiled an airtight, undeniable dossier of his addiction and gross financial negligence. The judge had not hesitated for a single second when my lawyer presented the massive file this morning. "You planned this!" Marcus breathed out, his voice shaking with realization. "I survived you," I corrected him coldly. "Now get out." The contractors moved in unison. They grabbed Marcus by the arms, completely ignoring his frantic thrashing and desperate pleas. They physically marched him out the door. Eleanor tried to intervene, raising her expensive handbag to strike a guard, but another contractor easily caught her wrist, turning her around and marching her out into the bright hallway. Jessica and Chloe practically scrambled over each other to avoid being manhandled, rushing out of the room with their heads ducked in utter humiliation. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, separating us. The lead guard locked it from the inside, standing guard, while I carefully transferred Leo and Aria into their double stroller. Through the thick observation glass in the door, I could see Eleanor pacing the hallway like a caged animal. She was slamming her hand against the glass, pointing aggressively at her briefcase, mouthing words about her victory. She still thought she had won. I pushed the stroller toward the door. The guard stepped aside, keeping his hand resting casually near his holster. I stopped right in front of the glass. Eleanor glared at me, her face flushed with absolute fury. I looked her dead in the eye and smiled. I did not raise my voice, but I knew she could read my lips and hear me clearly through the heavy pain. "Thank you for the $34 million, Eleanor," I said, articulating every single syllable. "You thought you were buying me off with your pocket change. But I audited the Sterling family enterprise last week. I know about the massive collateral deficit. I know about the illegal offshore loans you secretly secured against your commercial real estate. You just handed me the absolute last drop of clean, untethered liquidity your entire empire had left." Eleanor stopped hitting the glass. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Her eyes darted to her briefcase, then back to me. The smug arrogance melted off her face, replaced by a sickening, profound dread. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I turned away from the glass. The security team formed a tight, protective circle around me and the stroller. We bypassed the main hospital corridors entirely, taking a secured freight elevator down to the underground loading dock. The cool, damp air of the concrete parking garage hit my face as the elevator doors slid open. A matte black bulletproof SUV was idling near the exit, its engine humming with quiet power. The driver stepped out immediately, opening the rear doors and securing the car seats while I climbed into the spacious back. The heavy doors shut, sealing me inside a quiet, impenetrable fortress. I settled into the leather seat, the adrenaline finally settling into a sharp, focused calm. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my encrypted laptop. I flipped it open, the screen casting a bright blue glow in the dim cabin. I brought up the primary terminal for the Sterling Family Enterprises Central Holding Bank. Because Eleanor had never bothered to revoke my access, assuming I was too naive to understand the overarching corporate architecture, I still had full administrative privileges to their high-yield investment accounts. I navigated directly to the collateral maintenance portal. The $34 million she had just wired me was the exact cash reserve required to maintain their margin requirements across 3 major commercial developments. With that money gone, their account was severely overdrawn. The banking system had not caught up yet. It needed a manual refresh to trigger the automated penalty sequence. I hovered my finger over the enter key. I thought about the 4 years of humiliation. I thought about Marcus bringing his mistress to my hospital bed. I thought about Jessica's vile insults. I pressed the key. The screen refreshed instantly. The green status bars across the Sterling portfolio vanished. The numbers dropped into the red, plummeting faster than the eye could track. A massive alert box flashed across the center of my laptop screen, glowing with absolute, undeniable finality. Critical margin call. The financial execution was locked. The banks would now automatically begin seizing their assets to cover the massive deficit. I closed the laptop, a profound sense of peace washing over me as the SUV sped out into the bright Atlanta afternoon. 10 miles away from the quiet loading dock where my bulletproof SUV disappeared into the late afternoon traffic, Marcus and Chloe were already celebrating their perceived victory. They sat in the very center of the main dining room at Luminaire, downtown Atlanta's most exclusive Michelin star restaurant. The lighting was perfectly dim, casting a warm golden hue over the crystal glassware, the pristine white tablecloths, and the city's most elite patrons. Marcus had entirely brushed off the embarrassing encounter with my security team at the hospital as a temporary hysterical stunt. In his deeply arrogant mind, his mother's ruthless legal team would shred my restraining order by breakfast, retrieve his children, and officially erase me from the Sterling family narrative. Tonight, he only cared about his newfound freedom. Chloe sat across from him, practically vibrating with excitement. She wore a silk designer gown she had undoubtedly charged to a company account months ago. Her phone held high as she recorded the luxurious ambiance for her social media followers. She was finally stepping out of the shadows as an executive assistant and taking her rightful place as the future Mrs. Sterling. Marcus leaned back in his plush velvet chair, unbuttoning his tailored suit jacket with a deeply satisfied sigh. He told Chloe that he could finally breathe. He complained loudly about how I had suffocated his potential for 4 years, constantly nagging him about budgets, profit margins, and fiscal responsibility. He bragged to his young mistress that he was finally free from the boring, calculating girl from South Atlanta who never truly understood how to enjoy extreme wealth. To mark the grand occasion of his liberation, Marcus flagged down the head sommelier with an arrogant snap of his fingers. He did not ask for a menu or inquire about pairings. He simply demanded their finest, most exclusive bottle of Domaine de la Romanée Conti. The sommelier nodded with practiced politeness, returning moments later to present a vintage bottle that retailed for a staggering $5,000. Marcus proudly swirled the ruby liquid in his glass, toasting to his new life, his beautiful new woman, and his endless family wealth. They dined on caviar, imported Wagyu beef, and white truffles, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse accelerating through their corporate servers just a few miles away. 2 hours later, the waiter approached their table carrying a sleek black leather checkbook. Marcus did not even bother to glance at the itemized bill. He pulled out his heavy metal platinum American Express card and dropped it onto the silver tray with a loud metallic clank. He flashed a smug, self-assured smile at Chloe, promising her a massive shopping spree at Phipps Plaza the next morning to completely redecorate the master suite of the estate. The waiter bowed slightly and walked away toward the point of sale terminal near the kitchen. Less than 5 minutes passed before the waiter returned. The professional welcoming smile had vanished from his face, replaced by a tight, deeply uncomfortable grimace. He leaned in closely to Marcus, keeping his voice carefully lowered to avoid creating a scene in the elegant dining room. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience, but your card has been declined," the waiter whispered. Marcus let out a sharp, condescending laugh. He waved his hand dismissively at the staff member. "That is just a security trigger," Marcus announced loudly, not caring who at the neighboring tables heard him. "The bank always flags large restaurant bills when I forget to notify them I am out celebrating. Just run the card again. It will go through." The waiter shifted his weight nervously, clutching the leather book. "I have already attempted to process the transaction 3 separate times, Mr. Sterling. The bank is returning a hard decline code. We require another form of payment." Chloe's triumphant smile faltered instantly. She glanced nervously at the surrounding tables. Luminaire was packed with Atlanta's absolute elite. Corporate executives, local politicians, and wealthy socialites occupied the velvet booths, and several of them intimately knew the Sterling family. Marcus felt the eyes of the room turning toward him. His face flushed with a sudden hot and unfamiliar rage. He absolutely refused to look poor in front of his new mistress and his high society peers. He reached into his designer leather wallet and aggressively pulled out 3 distinct black corporate credit cards. These cards were tied directly to the Sterling Family Enterprise primary operating accounts, the absolute lifeblood of their business. He slapped all 3 of them down onto the table. Here Marcus barked, his voice carrying sharply across the quiet dining room. "Run the corporate accounts. Run all 3 of them if you have to. And bring me your general manager right now. I want this entire meal comped for the sheer embarrassment of your faulty machines." The waiter scooped up the cards and hurried away. Chloe reached across the table, placing her hand over Marcus's wrist. She urgently whispered for him to lower his voice, her cheeks burning with absolute mortification. People were beginning to stare openly. At the table right next to them, a prominent real estate developer paused his conversation to watch the spectacle unfold. A younger woman in the corner booth subtly raised her smartphone, the camera lens pointed directly at Marcus and Chloe, the recording light blinking in the dim room. The waiter returned a final time, followed closely by the restaurant's general manager. The manager placed the 3 black corporate cards back on the white tablecloth. His expression was completely rigid and uncompromising. "Mr. Sterling," the manager said, his tone devoid of any previous warmth or deference, "every single corporate card has been rejected by the issuing bank. We have contacted our merchant services desk directly, and they informed us that these accounts are entirely frozen. If you cannot provide a valid form of payment immediately, I will have no choice but to contact the local authorities for theft of services." Chloe gasped loudly, sinking lower into her chair and trying to hide her face from the glowing smartphone cameras around them. The whispers in the dining room grew into an audible, mocking hum. Marcus was hyperventilating, completely unaccustomed to the word no. He snatched his mobile phone from his pocket, his hands shaking with furious indignation. He dialed the private wealth concierge line at his primary financial institution, intentionally bypassing the standard customer service queues. He slammed the phone down onto the table and hit the speaker button, determined to publicly prove the restaurant was making a catastrophic mistake. The phone dialed, and after a brief sequence of automated tones, a senior private banker answered. The voice echoed clearly across the tense dining table. "Mr. Sterling," the banker said, his voice entirely devoid of the usual fawning respect he reserved for the family. Marcus leaned forward, his face red with rage. "Why are my cards declining?" Marcus shouted at the device. "Unfreeze my accounts right this second. I am trying to pay a dinner bill and your system is humiliating me." There was a heavy, terrible pause on the line. The surrounding patrons leaned in closer, eager to witness the wealthy heir's spectacular downfall. When the banker finally spoke, his words struck Marcus like a physical execution. "Mr. Sterling, all your accounts have been frozen. Your mother authorized the assumption of $150 million in toxic debt this morning." While Marcus stood frozen in the middle of the luxury dining room, the banker's devastating words echoing in his ears, His sister-in-law Jessica was 10 miles away, completely oblivious to the financial slaughter tearing through their family name. Jessica sat in the private viewing suite of an ultra-exclusive jewelry boutique in the heart of Buckhead. She sank into a plush velvet sofa, sipping a complimentary glass of imported champagne, while the store director carefully presented a stunning diamond and emerald necklace on a black velvet tray. Jessica felt absolutely invincible. In her mind, the morning had been a flawless, historic victory. They had successfully cornered Maya, forced her signature on the divorce documents, and purged the Sterling bloodline of its only blemish. Jessica smiled as she admired the heavy jewels glittering under the harsh display lights. She felt she deserved a reward for enduring the unpleasantness of stepping foot inside a sterile hospital maternity ward. The necklace retailed for $120,000. It was an obscene amount of money for a Tuesday afternoon impulse buy, but Jessica did not care. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a heavy titanium card. This specific card was not tied to her regular household allowance. It was linked directly to her husband David's offshore slush fund, a hidden account he used to hide corporate dividends from the IRS. Jessica handed the metal card to the boutique director with a practiced, arrogant flick of her wrist. She told him to wrap the necklace immediately because she had a charity luncheon to attend. The director bowed his head respectfully and disappeared into the back office to process the exorbitant transaction. Jessica took another sip of champagne, pulling out her phone to browse luxury real estate listings. She was already planning where Marcus and Chloe should buy their new summer home. But her pleasant daydream was abruptly shattered when the boutique director returned. His previously fawning posture had vanished, replaced by a rigid, deeply uncomfortable stiffness. He carried the titanium card between two fingers, placing it carefully on the glass table rather than handing it directly back to her. "I am terribly sorry, Mrs. Sterling," the director said, keeping his voice carefully low to avoid alerting the other wealthy patrons in the main showroom. "Your financial institution has declined the transaction." Jessica scoffed immediately, rolling her eyes with intense irritation. She aggressively picked up the card and shoved it back toward his chest. "Run it again," she demanded sharply. "You obviously entered the security code incorrectly. Do you have any idea how much money sits in that specific portfolio? There is over $4 million in liquid cash alone. Run the card and stop wasting my time." The director did not reach for the card. He folded his hands in front of him, his expression hardening into professional coldness. "I have run the card 3 separate times, Mrs. Sterling. I even took the liberty of calling our merchant bank directly to ensure there was no error on our end. The bank representative informed me that the account has not been suspended for a fraud alert. The transaction is declining because the account has been entirely drained. The balance is currently showing as 0. Jessica froze. The champagne glass in her hand trembled slightly, spilling a few golden drops onto her pristine designer skirt. She stared at the man, her mind refusing to comprehend the words. A 0 balance was impossible. That offshore account was entirely disconnected from their daily expenses. She snatched the card off the table, her cheeks burning with a sudden furious heat. She grabbed her handbag and stormed out of the private suite, ignoring the confused stares of the sales associates as she marched through the heavy glass doors and out into the blazing Atlanta sun. She climbed into the driver's seat of her pristine white Porsche Panamera, slamming the door shut with a violent force. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she dialed her husband's private number. David answered on the first ring, but he did not say hello. He was hyperventilating. The background noise on his end of the line was a chaotic symphony of shouting voices, ringing phones, and sheer corporate panic. "David, what is going on?" Jessica screamed into the phone, slamming her hand against the steering wheel. "I am at the jewelry boutique and my card just declined. The manager had the audacity to tell me your offshore account has a 0 balance. Call the wealth manager and fix this humiliation right now." "Jessica, shut up and listen to me," David roared back, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "The offshore account is gone. Everything is gone. The commercial real estate, the domestic trusts, the corporate cards, the investment portfolios. The bank is seizing all of it. We are ruined." Jessica felt the breath leave her lungs. her vision blurred at the edges. "What are you talking about?" she gasped. "How can everything be gone? We have hundreds of millions in assets." "We do not have assets, Jessica. We have debt." David shouted, his panic spiraling out of control. Eleanor overleveraged the entire family enterprise to cover her bad commercial investments. She cross-collateralized everything. "My offshore fund, your household accounts, Marcus's trust. It was all tied together to secure a massive line of credit. The only thing keeping the bank from calling in a $150 million toxic debt was a specific cash liquidity requirement sitting in the primary operating account." Jessica's blood ran entirely cold as the horrific reality began to piece itself together. "How much was the liquidity requirement?" she asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. $34 million, David cried out, and Eleanor wired that exact amount to an untouchable Cayman Islands trust an hour ago. The second that money left our domestic ecosystem, the primary account fell below the legal threshold. It triggered an automatic, catastrophic margin call. The bank's algorithms immediately executed a sweep of every single cross-collateralized account attached to the sterling name to cover the deficit. Maya knew exactly what she was doing. She did not just take a divorce settlement, she pulled the financial pin out of the grenade and handed it right back to my mother. Jessica dropped her phone. It clattered against the passenger seat as she stared blankly through her windshield. Maya had orchestrated a financial slaughter. She had sat in that hospital bed bleeding and exhausted and manipulated the most powerful woman in Atlanta into bankrupting her entire bloodline. The $34 million was not just a payout, it was the structural anchor holding up their entire fake empire. A blinding, violent rage overtook Jessica. She was now completely penniless. Her social standing, her luxury cars, her estate, everything was currently being liquidated by a banking algorithm because Eleanor was too arrogant to realize she was being played by a forensic accountant. Jessica slammed the Porsche into gear. She tore out of the luxury shopping plaza, her tires screeching against the asphalt as she ignored red lights and speed limits. She drove like a woman possessed, speeding all the way to the sprawling Sterling estate in Buckhead. She abandoned her car directly on the pristine front lawn, leaving the engine running and the door wide open. She marched up the marble steps and burst through the heavy oak double doors of the mansion. Eleanor was standing in the grand foyer holding her encrypted banking device and screaming at a team of lawyers who were pacing nervously around the room. Jessica did not hesitate. She crossed the marble floor, her heels echoing like gunshots, and screamed at the top of her lungs, announcing to the entire room that her mother-in-law's supreme arrogance had just permanently bankrupted the entire family. Eleanor's head snapped up. The team of high-priced corporate attorneys froze in the center of the grand foyer, their terrified eyes darting between the matriarch and her hysterical daughter-in-law. Eleanor's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. She lunged forward, grabbing Jessica by the forearm with a vice-like grip. Her perfectly manicured nails dug painfully into Jessica's skin as she dragged her away from the staring staff and shoved her forcefully through the heavy mahogany doors of her private study. The heavy doors clicked shut, trapping them inside a room that was practically vibrating with incoming phone calls. The primary landline on the desk was flashing red. Eleanor's encrypted mobile device vibrated endlessly against the polished wood. Jessica stumbled backward, rubbing her bruised arm, but her fury entirely eclipsed her fear. "David's offshore accounts are gone!" Jessica shrieked, her voice echoing off the leather-bound books lining the walls. "Every single cent we had hidden in the Caymans has been seized." I stood in front of the boutique manager like an absolute peasant while he cut up my titanium card. "You told David this plan was foolproof. You said moving that $34 million would untether Maya from the enterprise. Instead, you triggered a catastrophic margin call and liquidated our entire lives." Eleanor slammed her hands flat onto her desk. "Shut your mouth!" she hissed, her voice trembling with an unhinged feral energy. "Do you think you are the only one losing money right now? The board of directors has been calling me for 3 hours. The central bank locked us out of the commercial real estate portals. They are threatening to seize the downtown high-rises before the markets even open tomorrow." Eleanor snatched the ringing landline off the receiver. Before she could even speak, the furious, booming voice of the holding company's chief investor filled the quiet study. He demanded answers. He screamed about plummeting stock valuations and frozen liquidity. For the absolute first time in her pristine, highly curated life, Eleanor Sterling lost her regal composure. Her hands shook violently. A stray lock of her signature blonde hair fell across her forehead, making her look haggard and wild. "We are handling it!" Eleanor screamed into the receiver, her voice cracking under the sheer pressure. "It is a temporary banking error. I will have the funds replaced by morning." She slammed the phone down so hard the plastic base cracked. She turned away from the desk, pacing the length of the study like a cornered predator. She could not comprehend how a quiet, subservient girl from South Atlanta had orchestrated a multi-million-dollar financial ambush. Maya had sat in that hospital bed, bleeding and fragile, and played the entire Sterling family for absolute fools. She had gladly accepted the $34 million wire transfer because she knew it was the exact amount keeping the Sterling's toxic debt hidden from the federal auditors. Jessica collapsed into a leather armchair, burying her face in her hands as she sobbed over her lost mansions and vanished luxury cars. The hours bled together in a grueling, agonizing blur of rejected wire transfers, panicked lawyers resigning over text message, and offshore bankers refusing to return Eleanor's calls. The dark sky outside the study windows slowly transitioned into the pale, cold blue of early morning. The antique grandfather clock in the corner chimed softly. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. Eleanor stood frozen behind her desk, her eyes bloodshot and her posture defeated. Her gaze slowly drifted downward, landing on the thick manila folder she had proudly carried out of the hospital yesterday afternoon. The divorce settlement, the custody surrender, the documents she had ruthlessly forced Maya to sign under the threat of federal prosecution. A sudden sickening wave of paranoia washed over her. Maya had signed those papers far too quickly. She had not argued. She had not bargained for visitation. She had simply demanded the wire transfer and signed her name on the dotted line. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for the folder. She ripped it open, spilling the thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany. She bypassed the standard divorce decrees and flipped frantically toward the back of the packet, searching for the custody addendums. She turned to the final page, her eyes scanning the dense fine print that Maya's invisible legal team had drafted. The breath completely left Eleanor's lungs. Her blood turned to ice water. It was not a custody surrender. During Maya's 4 years acting as the quiet, obedient wife, she had also served as the primary bookkeeper for Marcus's shell companies. She had intimately mapped out every single illegal tax evasion strategy, every fraudulent offshore loan, and every instance of corporate embezzlement the Sterlings had ever committed. Maya had used that insider knowledge to draft a legally binding, irrevocable transfer of liability. By forcing Maya to sign the documents under the guise of an emergency hospital settlement, Eleanor had blindly authorized the complete transfer of the family's toxic illegal shell companies entirely into her own personal name. Maya had officially surrendered her ties to the Sterling family, but she had chained Eleanor directly to decades of federal financial crimes. Eleanor was now the sole owner of a crumbling, fraudulent empire, and she had just handed Maya all the clean, untethered cash they had left. A guttural, horrifying scream ripped through Eleanor's throat. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated terror. She lunged forward, grabbing handfuls of the legal documents, her manicured nails tearing through the heavy paper. She scrambled toward the heavy-duty industrial shredder sitting in the corner of the study, desperate to destroy the evidence of her own catastrophic arrogance. Before she could even power the machine on, a sound stopped her dead in her tracks. It was not the ringing of a telephone or the panicked sobbing of her daughter-in-law. It was the heavy rhythmic crunch of tactical boots marching in perfect unison up the long paved driveway of the estate. Eleanor turned slowly toward the grand windows. Through the thick glass, she saw a fleet of matte black federal vehicles violently breaching the front security gates. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the early morning fog, casting a terrifying glow across the pristine manicured lawns. The heavy iron gates groaned and snapped backward off their hinges with a violent screech of tearing metal. 5 matte black SUVs tore up the winding imported gravel driveway, their tires ripping deep, aggressive trenches into the immaculate landscaping Eleanor prized above all else. The vehicles lurched to a halt in a synchronized tactical formation, blocking every possible exit from the grand portico. Doors flew open in unison. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical gear poured out into the damp morning air. The bold, stark yellow letters spelling out FBI and IRS practically glowed against the dark fabric of their windbreakers. Eleanor stood paralyzed behind the glass, her breath catching in her throat. For a fraction of a second, her mind refused to process the reality unfolding on her front lawn. Wealthy people of her caliber did not get raided. They received polite phone calls from their highly paid attorneys. They settled disputes over private lunches at exclusive country clubs. They did not have armed federal agents swarming their rose bushes at dawn. Before Eleanor could even pivot away from the window, a deafening crash echoed through the mansion. The massive custom-built oak double doors of the grand foyer exploded inward. The heavy wood splintered violently, the reinforced deadbolts completely failing against a tactical battering ram. Shards of expensive wood rained across the imported Italian marble floor. 12 armed agents immediately flooded the expansive foyer, fanning out with practiced military precision. They moved swiftly, their heavy boots loudly crushing the scattered wood splinters and tracking mud across the pristine white stone. Flashlights cut through the dim, early morning shadows of the mansion, illuminating the crystal chandeliers and the priceless Renaissance artwork lining the walls. Jessica, who was still slumped in the leather armchair nearby, let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She scrambled backward, her expensive designer heels slipping frantically on the slick marble as she tried to press herself into the absolute furthest corner of the room. She curled into a tight, trembling ball, covering her face with her shaking hands, utterly terrified by the sudden invasion. The sheer audacity of the physical breach acted like a violent spark to Eleanor's dormant arrogance. The sheer terror that had gripped her in the study instantly mutated into a blinding elitist rage. She was Eleanor Sterling. She controlled politicians, judges, and entire zoning boards. She absolutely refused to be treated like a common criminal in her own ancestral home. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and marched out of the study directly into the center of the grand foyer. She did not raise her hands. She did not cower. She glared at the heavily armed men and women occupying her house with absolute venomous disdain. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor demanded, her voice cutting through the chaotic shouting of the agents like a sharpened blade. Her tone was dripping with absolute authority and condescension. "Stand down immediately and get out of my home. You are trespassing on private property, and I guarantee every single one of you will be standing in an unemployment line by noon." The agents did not even pause their perimeter sweep. They completely ignored her threats, moving past her to secure the hallways and the massive curved staircase leading to the residential wing. "I said get out!" Eleanor roared, her face flushing a deep, furious red. "Do you have any earthly idea who you are dealing with? I play golf with the governor of Georgia every single Sunday. I personally fund the re-election campaigns for half the judges sitting in Fulton County. I will have the chief of police pull your badges before you can even step foot off my driveway. You do not have the clearance, the jurisdiction, or the basic authority to kick down my doors." A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped through the shattered doorway and walked casually into the foyer. He wore a crisp suit under his dark FBI windbreaker, his expression entirely devoid of intimidation or respect. He did not look at the crystal chandeliers or the sweeping dual staircases. He looked directly at Eleanor with the tired, unimpressed gaze of a man who had arrested 100 corrupt billionaires exactly like her. He stopped just a few feet away from her, invading her personal space with calm, deliberate authority. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily bound stack of legal documents. "Eleanor Sterling." The lead agent stated, his voice a low, steady rumble that completely absorbed her shrill threats. "You can call the governor. You can call the mayor. You can call whoever you like, but it will not make a shred of difference. We are not local police, and your political donations mean absolutely nothing to the federal government." Eleanor opened her mouth to scream another threat, but the agent simply raised his hand, cutting her off with absolute finality. "You are being served with a multi-agency federal indictment," the agent continued, his eyes locked onto hers. "A federal grand jury convened late last night and issued a warrant for your immediate arrest. You are officially charged with 147 counts of systemic tax evasion, extensive wire fraud, and international money laundering." The words echoed brutally through the cavernous foyer. Jessica whimpered from her corner, her hands gripping her hair as she realized the true, inescapable magnitude of the situation. "We have officially frozen every single domestic and offshore account tied to your Social Security number and the Sterling family enterprise." The agent listed off, his tone clinical and detached. "We have seized the commercial properties, the luxury vehicles, the private jet charter, and this estate. You do not own anything anymore, Mrs. Sterling. This property is now an active sealed federal crime scene. You are bankrupt, and you are going to federal prison." Eleanor stared at him, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw breath. Her mind raced frantically, trying to find a loophole, a legal technicality, any shred of leverage she could exploit to halt the nightmare. "You have absolutely nothing!" Eleanor spat, her voice shaking with a desperate, frantic denial. "You have no proof. My accounts are heavily encrypted. My offshore trusts are insulated by layers of untouchable corporate liability. I am completely shielded. Your entire indictment is based on circumstantial financial rumors, and my attorneys will shred it before it ever reaches a courtroom." The lead agent did not look angry or defensive. Instead, a slow, deeply satisfied smirk spread across his face. He looked around the opulent mansion, taking in the sheer, undeniable greed that had funded the marble floors and the silk draperies. He looked back at Eleanor, his eyes gleaming with professional triumph. "Normally, you would be absolutely right," the agent replied, his voice dropping to a quiet, devastating murmur. "Your corporate architecture was incredibly sophisticated. It was a brilliant, highly insulated maze of illegal shell companies. It would have taken my forensic accountants a decade to pierce the corporate veil and tie the fraud directly to you." Eleanor swallowed hard, a sickening knot forming tight in her stomach. However, the agent continued, pulling a single crisp sheet of paper from the very front of the indictment packet. "We have an anonymous whistleblower to thank for bypassing all of that red tape. She handed us the entire kingdom on a silver platter. She provided us with a flawless, airtight paper trail detailing exactly how your family moves its dirty money." The agent held the document up, holding it inches from Eleanor's face. It was a copy of the exact page she had just discovered in her study. And best of all, the agent smiled, tapping his finger against the bottom right corner of the page. "She provided us with your fresh, legally verified signature. You completely bypassed your own corporate protections. You signed a binding addendum yesterday afternoon authorizing full unconditional personal liability for every single one of those illegal shell companies. You tied the noose around your own neck, Mrs. Sterling." Eleanor stared at her own elegant, sweeping signature on the bottom of the document. The absolute reality of Maya's lethal brilliance crashed down upon her, shattering her ego into a million irreparable pieces. Her legs gave out completely. Her knees hit the cold marble floor with a heavy, echoing thud. While Eleanor's knees hit the cold marble floor of her Buckhead estate, another heavily armed federal strike team was executing a simultaneous, perfectly coordinated raid 10 miles south. The private elevator opening directly into Marcus's dual-level midtown penthouse did not politely chime. The heavy steel doors were forcefully pried apart by a tactical breaching tool. Marcus was still wearing his tailored dinner jacket from his humiliating exit at the Michelin star restaurant. He was pacing frantically in front of his floor-to-ceiling windows, desperately redialing his mother's blocked number, when a dozen agents wearing FBI and IRS windbreakers flooded his living room. The lead agent did not offer a polite greeting. He loudly ordered his team to secure the premises and immediately presented Marcus with a search and seizure warrant signed by a federal judge. Marcus dropped his mobile phone. The device shattered against the imported hardwood floor. He watched in absolute paralyzed horror as agents immediately began tagging and seizing his entire life. Two agents walked straight to his custom glass display cases and began boxing up his multi-million-dollar watch collection. Another agent methodically pulled priceless contemporary art pieces directly off the walls. A junior officer approached the marble kitchen island and confiscated the keys to Marcus's Aston Martin and customized Range Rover. "This is a mistake!" Marcus shrieked, his voice pitching into a hysterical high-frequency panic. "You have no right to be here. My mother is Eleanor Sterling. You cannot touch my property." The lead agent did not even pause from logging a seized diamond-encrusted Rolex. "Your mother is currently in federal custody, Mr. Sterling," the agent replied coldly. "And this is no longer your property. Every asset in this penthouse was purchased using embezzled corporate funds. You are completely bankrupt." The words struck Marcus with the force of a physical blow. The absolute reality of his situation, the declined credit cards at the restaurant, the frozen bank accounts, and now the federal raid finally broke his fragile, arrogant mind. His legs gave out completely. He collapsed onto the imported Persian rug, his chest heaving violently as a severe panic attack took hold. He was hyperventilating, his hands clutching his chest as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. Chloe emerged from the master suite, alerted by the chaotic shouting. She took one look at the federal agents swarming the penthouse and instantly understood the severity of the situation. The glittering, invincible Sterling Empire was completely dead. Marcus looked up at her from the floor, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Chloe," he gasped, reaching a trembling hand out toward her designer heels. "Call your father. Call him right now. Tell him I need a bailout. Just a bridge loan to clear this misunderstanding. Tell him I will pay him back with interest. Please, Chloe." For the entire duration of their illicit relationship, Chloe had played the role of the sweet, innocent, adoring subordinate who was completely enamored by Marcus's business genius. But as she looked down at the pathetic, hyperventilating man sobbing on the floor, that carefully crafted mask completely dissolved. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. She did not drop to her knees to comfort him. She did not reach for her phone. Instead, she let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed coldly over the sounds of the agents boxing up the penthouse. "Call my father," Chloe sneered, stepping casually around Marcus's outstretched hand. "My father is a retired insurance adjuster in Cleveland. Do you actually think I come from money? I spent my last $10,000 on a wardrobe just to get hired at your firm so I could bag a wealthy executive." Marcus stared at her, his eyes wide with absolute betrayal and shock. He struggled to process her words through his suffocating panic. "You love me," he wheezed out. "We are getting married." Chloe rolled her eyes in profound disgust. She walked over to the entryway closet and casually pulled out a large, heavy designer suitcase. She flipped it open on the floor and began rapidly shoving her expensive coats and shoes inside. "I never loved you, Marcus," she stated, her voice devoid of any human empathy. "You are arrogant, you are lazy, and you are terrible in bed. The only thing attractive about you is the Sterling name and your unlimited bank accounts. I wanted the mansions, the private jets, and the black cards." She zipped her suitcase shut with a sharp final motion. She pulled the handle up and walked straight toward the front door, physically stepping directly over Marcus's trembling legs, as if he were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of trash. She paused at the doorway, looking down at him one last time with a cold, triumphant smirk. "You are nothing without your mommy's checkbook, Marcus," she said cruelly. "Have a nice life in prison." Chloe turned on her heel, her chin held high, fully intending to walk out of the federal raid and directly into a new life. She had carefully secured her absolute prized possession tightly over her forearm. It was a pristine Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag that retailed for $50,000. Marcus had purchased it for her just 2 weeks ago to celebrate her official promotion to his primary mistress. She took exactly 2 confident steps into the hallway before a female federal agent stepped squarely into her path. The agent was tall, imposing, and completely unbothered by Chloe's designer aesthetic. "Excuse me," Chloe snapped, reverting to her entitled high society persona. "I do not live here, and I am not a member of the Sterling family. Let me pass." The agent did not move an inch. Her eyes dropped directly to the heavy exotic leather handbag resting on Chloe's arm. She reached out and placed a firm, uncompromising hand on the bag's handle. "You are free to leave, ma'am," the agent said, her voice steady and authoritative. "But the bag stays," Chloe gasped, her eyes widening in absolute outrage. She yanked her arm back, trying to rip the bag out of the agent's grip. "Are you insane?" Chloe shrieked. "This is my personal property. It was a gift. You cannot touch my things." "That bag was purchased with illicit corporate funds, ma'am," the agent replied coldly, easily overpowering Chloe's frantic resistance and stripping the handbag from her arm. "Every single gift Marcus Sterling purchased for you using his corporate accounts is subject to immediate federal asset forfeiture. That includes the jewelry you are wearing and the luggage you are carrying." Before Chloe could even scream, two more agents flanked her. They quickly and efficiently confiscated her suitcase, unzipped it, and dumped her expensive, illicitly funded wardrobe onto the floor to be cataloged. They demanded she remove the diamond tennis bracelet and the emerald earrings Marcus had bought her. Chloe was hyperventilating now, completely stripped of her wealthy facade. The agents physically marched her out of the penthouse and pushed her into the building's service elevator. 10 minutes later, Chloe found herself standing entirely alone on the cold, concrete curb of the Midtown Atlanta sidewalk. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the city skyline. She had no money, no designer bags, no wealthy fiancé, and absolutely nowhere to go. She sank down onto the hard concrete, buried her face in her empty hands, and sobbed uncontrollably as the federal vehicles idled quietly behind her. 48 hours after the federal raids dismantled their fraudulent empire, the sterile, fluorescent glare of the federal courthouse stripped away the very last illusion of the Sterling family's invincibility. Eleanor and Marcus sat shackled at the defense table. They were no longer the untouchable elite of Atlanta. They were federal inmates. The harsh, stiff fabric of their bright orange county jumpsuits chafed against skin accustomed only to bespoke silk and imported cashmere. Marcus stared blankly at his scuffed, laceless, institutional slip-ons, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. Without his tailored suits, his luxury watches, and the arrogant swagger funded by stolen millions, he looked remarkably small. He looked utterly terrified. Eleanor sat rigid beside him, her wrists bound by heavy steel chains that clanked loudly against the wooden table every time she shifted. Her signature blonde hair, usually blown out to absolute perfection, hung limp and greasy around her gaunt face. She refused to look at the crowded gallery behind her. She knew exactly who was sitting in the second row watching their public humiliation with cold, calculating eyes. Jessica sat perfectly upright on the hard wooden bench, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She had miraculously avoided the initial wave of arrests, shielded temporarily by the fact that her name was completely absent from the shell company registries. But Jessica was not there to offer familial support. She glared at the backs of Eleanor and Marcus with pure, unadulterated venom. Her mind worked at lightning speed, actively plotting her own exit strategy. She was already cataloging which federal prosecutors she could approach, running through a mental list of exactly which family secrets she could trade for absolute legal immunity. If the Sterling ship was sinking to the bottom of the ocean, Jessica fully intended to use Eleanor as her personal flotation device. The heavy oak door behind the bench swung open, and the federal judge took his seat, his stern gaze immediately fixing on the defense table. The bail hearing had officially begun. The federal prosecutor wasted absolutely no time immediately requesting that bail be denied entirely. He laid out a damning, meticulous summary of the flight risk, citing the family's history of offshore accounts, their extensive network of illegal shell companies, and the staggering magnitude of the financial fraud they had perpetrated over the last decade. Eleanor's high-priced defense attorney, a silver-haired shark named Harrison Vance, shot to his feet. He had been retained using the very last scrap of clean, verifiable cash Eleanor had managed to scrape together from a forgotten personal trust. Vance aggressively adjusted his suit jacket, projecting an aura of absolute manufactured outrage. "Your Honor, the prosecution is painting a patently false narrative," Vance boomed, his voice echoing authoritatively off the courtroom walls. My clients are not criminal masterminds. They are victims. They are the tragic victims of a highly sophisticated, deeply malicious extortion plot orchestrated by a woman they welcomed into their own home. Marcus snapped his head up, his eyes widening, as Vance launched the desperate counteroffensive. Eleanor finally straightened her spine, a desperate, vicious spark of hope igniting in her chest. Vance paced purposefully in front of the defense table, gesturing dramatically toward his shackled clients. The woman the prosecution calls a whistleblower is nothing more than a ruthless opportunist, he declared passionately. Maya Sterling spent years manipulating this family. She used her position as a supposedly devoted wife to gain unauthorized access to their private financial records. And when she secured that information, she executed a hostile, illegal takeover of their assets. The federal prosecutor scoffed loudly, but the judge raised a hand signaling for Vance to continue. Just days ago, Maya Sterling checked herself into a hospital. Vance pressed on, his volume rising. She claimed to be suffering from severe postpartum distress. She lured her mother-in-law into a private room and used that manufactured medical emergency to execute a blatant act of extortion. Under extreme duress and fearing for the safety of her newborn grandson, Eleanor Sterling was forced to sign a complex legal document she was not permitted to read. Maya Sterling deliberately slipped an addendum into a standard custody surrender, fraudulently tricking my client into assuming full personal liability for financial irregularities Maya herself likely created. Jessica rolled her eyes so hard they nearly rolled into the back of her skull. The absolute sheer audacity of the lie was staggering, but she knew Vance was earning his exorbitant fee. Furthermore, Your Honor, Vance stated, slamming his hand down onto the podium, Maya Sterling did not simply walk away with immunity. She walked away with $34 million of my client's legitimate, hard-earned family wealth. We formally demand that Maya Sterling be subpoenaed immediately. We demand those stolen funds be frozen, returned to this court, and applied directly to my client's bail. They are entitled to their freedom, and that woman is holding their legal defense fund hostage. The courtroom fell completely silent. The judge frowned, looking down at the federal prosecutor with a raised eyebrow. The accusation of extortion was severe, and Vance had managed to inject a sliver of doubt into the proceedings. The lead prosecutor stood up slowly, calmly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not look flustered. He did not look defensive. He looked entirely amused. Your Honor, the prosecution is well aware of the defense's intention to shift blame, the prosecutor stated smoothly. In fact, we anticipated it. That is precisely why our primary witness has agreed to make a statement regarding the voluntary nature of the document signing right here on the record today. Eleanor's heart hammered violently against her ribs. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. They both whipped their heads toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. The bailiff stepped forward and pushed the doors wide open. Eleanor held her breath, waiting for Maya to walk through those doors. She waited to see the meek, submissive girl she had bullied and tormented for 4 years. She was ready to tear her apart on the stand. But Maya did not step into the courtroom. Instead, 2 court technicians maneuvered a massive, heavy-duty audiovisual cart through the doorway. They rolled the towering high-definition monitor directly into the center of the courtroom, positioning it perfectly so it faced the judge, the prosecution, and the defense table. The technicians plugged a thick black cable into the floor port. The screen flickered black for a fraction of a second. A sharp electronic beep echoed through the room. Then the screen flared to life in brilliant high-definition color. Maya appeared via a highly secure encrypted video link. She was broadcasting from an undisclosed sun-drenched location that looked absolutely nothing like Atlanta. The background featured floor-to-ceiling windows displaying a sprawling, pristine tropical coastline. Maya sat comfortably in a plush leather chair. She was not wearing hospital scrubs or the modest, inexpensive dresses Eleanor used to force her to buy. She wore a stunning, flawlessly tailored white blazer that screamed old money and absolute power. Her hair was styled perfectly, her posture was relaxed, and she looked utterly, devastatingly immaculate. She held a delicate porcelain coffee cup in one hand. She took a slow, deliberate sip, looking directly into the camera lens. Her dark eyes locked onto the screen, piercing straight through the digital feed to find Eleanor staring up at her in shackled, powerless horror. Maya offered a small, terrifyingly serene smile. "Good morning, Your Honor." Maya's voice chimed through the courtroom speakers, smooth and entirely unbothered. "I apologize for not appearing in person. Given the violent history of the individuals sitting at the defense table, my security team strongly advised me to remain at my current undisclosed location." Eleanor choked on her breath, the heavy steel chains rattling violently as she gripped the edge of the defense table. Harrison Vance, completely blindsided by the digital ambush, desperately shuffled his papers. He demanded the video link be severed, shouting frantic objections about unverified witnesses and procedural protocol. The judge, the Honorable Evelyn Caldwell, slammed her gavel down with deafening force. She was a formidable African-American woman with decades of experience dismantling corporate criminals, and she had absolute zero patience for Vance's theatrical outrage. She ordered him to sit down and instructed Maya to proceed. Before Maya could speak another word, a sharp scraping of wood against marble echoed from the gallery. Jessica shot up from her bench. Her eyes darted wildly between the giant monitor, the furious judge, and her crumbling mother-in-law. Panic and self-preservation completely overrode her basic common sense. She realized Eleanor was sinking fast, and if Eleanor went down, Jessica's lavish lifestyle went down with her. She needed to be the ultimate savior. She needed to prove her worth to the court and secure her own absolute immunity. She marched past the wooden partition separating the gallery from the trial floor, blatantly ignoring the bailiff who stepped forward to intercept her. In her right hand, she tightly clutched a sleek silver flash drive. "Your Honor!" Jessica shouted, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "My mother-in-law's attorney is far too slow, but I have the absolute proof you need. I have the concrete evidence that this woman is a manipulative, extorting criminal." Judge Caldwell glared down from the bench, her expression hardening into absolute granite. She demanded to know exactly who Jessica was and why she was interrupting a federal bail hearing. "I am Jessica Sterling," she declared proudly, aggressively, puffing out her chest. "And I have the security footage from the hospital room. I paid the hospital administrator $10,000 to discreetly pull the tapes yesterday morning. This drive shows exactly what happened. It proves Maya held us hostage in that room and demanded the $34 million before she would sign the legal release." Eleanor whipped her head around, staring at Jessica in absolute shock. A brief flash of genuine triumph crossed Eleanor's haggard face. For once, her vapid status-obsessed daughter-in-law had actually done something incredibly useful. Vance immediately seized the golden opportunity, demanding the court review, the footage arguing it would undeniably corroborate his claims of coercion and severe postpartum duress. Judge Caldwell narrowed her dark eyes but nodded curtly to the court clerk. She ordered the bailiff to take the flash drive, scan it for security risks, and project it onto the secondary courtroom monitors. The screens flickered, displaying the sterile, fluorescent-lit hospital room. The digital timestamp matched the previous afternoon perfectly. The video clearly showed Maya sitting up in the hospital bed, looking pale and exceptionally fragile. The heavy doors swung open, and Eleanor and Jessica marched inside, looming over the bed like cornered predators. "See?" Jessica announced loudly, pointing a manicured finger directly at the screen. "Look at her deceptive body language. She is dictating the terms. She is refusing to sign the documents unless Eleanor processes the wire transfer. She planned the entire ambush." The video played silently. The hospital's internal security system was visual, only, a standard protocol designed to comply with strict patient privacy laws. On the screen, Eleanor aggressively shoved the thick manila folder onto Maya's lap. Maya picked up a pen, gestured toward her phone, and then methodically signed the papers. "It looks exactly like the brutal extortion we described," Vance proclaimed, adjusting his tie with renewed arrogance. "The defense rests its case for bail, Your Honor." A soft, melodic laugh suddenly filled the courtroom. Everyone turned their attention back to the massive central monitor. Maya was shaking her head, setting her porcelain coffee cup down on the table beside her. "That is a fascinating fictional narrative," Jessica Maya said, her voice dripping with absolute devastating pity.
But you forgot one fundamental flaw in your expensive little espionage mission. Hospital security cameras do not record audio, they only capture the visuals. Fortunately for the court, I am much more thorough than you are. Maya held up a small, sleek digital recorder directly to the camera lens.
I knew exactly who I was dealing with when I married into your toxic family, Maya stated, her gaze turning cold and fiercely lethal. I knew you would immediately attempt to twist the narrative to save yourselves. So when you ambushed me in recovery less than 24 hours after I gave birth to my sons, I slipped my phone under my pillow and recorded every single word. Jessica's triumphant smirk vanished instantly. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and ashen. Eleanor lunged forward in her chair, the heavy chains pulling taut against the table, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic escaping her tight throat. Maya tapped the screen of her device. I have already securely transmitted the raw audio file to the federal prosecutor. I suggest we sync the audio track with Jessica's video. Let us show the judge what a sterling family negotiation actually sounds like. The lead prosecutor nodded rapidly, tapping his keyboard. Within seconds, the silent hospital footage on the secondary screens restarted, but this time crystal clear audio filled the utterly silent courtroom. Eleanor's cold, cruel voice echoed off the walls. I am buying your exit, the recorded. Eleanor sneered, her tone dripping with malice. $34 million. You will sign this full custody surrender. You will leave my grandsons at this hospital, and you will walk away from my son forever. If you refuse, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your pathetic life rotting in a federal penitentiary while my family raises those boys. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the gallery. The raw, undeniable evil in Eleanor's voice was absolutely staggering. She was not a victim of extortion. She was orchestrating a ruthless, calculated bribe to forcibly rip a desperate mother away from her newborn children. But the recording did not stop there. Jessica's voice rang out next, shrill and dripping with absolute venom. Take the money and crawl back to whatever ghetto you came from, the recorded. Jessica spat. You are nothing but street trash who got lucky. You honestly thought you could blend in with us. Look at you. You are dirty. You are uncultured, and you taint our bloodline just by existing. Take the payout before we have you deported or thrown in a cage like the rest of your people. The audio cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing, heavy silence hanging in the courtroom. Jessica stood frozen in the absolute center of the floor. She could literally feel the furious stares of the entire room burning deeply into her skin. She slowly, fearfully turned her head toward the bench. Judge Caldwell sat perfectly motionless. She was a woman of color who had spent her entire distinguished legal career breaking through the exact type of systemic, elitist bigotry Jessica had just so casually spewed on tape. The judge slowly lowered her reading glasses, letting them rest on the bridge of her nose. She leaned forward, bracing her hands firmly on the heavy wooden bench. She did not yell. She did not aggressively bang her gavel. Her terrifying silence was far more punishing than any verbal reprimand could ever be. Judge Caldwell locked her piercing eyes onto Jessica and Eleanor. Her expression was a mask of pure, unadulterated, absolute disgust. Jessica shrank back, her silver flash drive slipping from her manicured fingers and clattering loudly onto the polished courtroom floor. The bailiff immediately stepped forward, grabbing Jessica by the arm and forcefully escorting her back to the gallery, forcing her to sit down in absolute humiliation. Harrison Vance, Eleanor's high-priced defense attorney, felt the entire foundation of his case disintegrate beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. The moral high ground was completely annihilated. The extortion defense was entirely dead. The courtroom was radiating a toxic hostility toward his clients. Vance realized with sickening clarity that Judge Caldwell was not going to grant bail to a family of bigoted, vindictive extortionists. He had to pivot immediately. He had to abandon the moral defense and ruthlessly attack the only tangible asset left in this catastrophic mess. He needed to secure the cash. Your Honor, Vance shouted, stepping aggressively in front of the defense table to block the judge's view of his ruined clients. He wiped a bead of nervous sweat from his forehead.
Regardless of the highly objectionable and deeply unfortunate nature of that private audio recording, the strict legal facts of this financial dispute remain entirely unchanged. We are discussing a staggering sum of capital. Maya Sterling is currently in possession of $34 million. Those are stolen marital assets. Judge Caldwell raised her hand, silencing him instantly. You just watched a video supplied by your own witness showing your client willingly signing the transfer documents, Counselor, the judge stated coldly. And we just listened to the audio of your client explicitly outlining the terms of that bribe. Do not insult my intelligence by calling it theft. It was a fraudulent conveyance executed under false pretenses, Vance argued, his voice rising in sheer panic. And more importantly, Your Honor, we are dealing with federal indictments. As of this morning, the IRS is actively seeking restitution for decades of unpaid corporate taxes tied to the shell companies Eleanor Sterling now legally controls. The $34 million Maya Sterling walked away with is absolutely vital to satisfying that federal debt. We formally demand an immediate federal injunction. We demand the court freeze Maya Sterling's account, subpoena her location, and forcibly repatriate those funds to pay for my client's bail and subsequent IRS penalties. Marcus let out a ragged, desperate wheeze from his chair. Eleanor finally snapped her head up, her eyes wide with frantic feral hope. Vance was right. If they could claw back the money, they could pay the bail. They could hire better lawyers. They could fight the federal charges. On the massive high-definition monitor, Maya did not flinch at the lawyer's aggressive shouting demands. She remained perfectly serene, bathed in the warm sunlight of her undisclosed tropical location. She took another slow, deliberate sip from her porcelain cup, set it down softly, and looked directly into the camera lens. Your Honor, Maya said, her voice smooth and echoing with absolute authority through the courtroom speakers. May I request permission to share a document directly to the courtroom display? Judge Caldwell nodded curtly, waving her hand to authorize the digital transfer. Proceed. Maya leaned forward and tapped her keyboard. Mr. Vance is operating under a severe, albeit entirely predictable miscalculation, Maya stated calmly. He is aggressively demanding that you freeze a bank account that is already completely empty. I do not have the $34 million, Your Honor. The defense table erupted into absolute chaos. Eleanor lunged forward against the heavy wooden table, her steel chains rattling violently as she screamed accusations of offshore laundering. Vance began shouting over her, waving his hands frantically at the judge, demanding international arrest warrants and immediate asset freezes. The massive monitor flickered. Maya's live video feed shrunk into a smaller box in the top right corner. The main screen was immediately replaced by a highly detailed, officially stamped financial document. It was heavily watermarked, bearing the unmistakable insignia of one of the largest, most tightly regulated federal banking institutions in the country. Judge Caldwell leaned in, adjusting her glasses to read the glowing text on the monitor. What you are looking at is a legally binding, completely irrevocable transfer receipt, Maya explained, cutting effortlessly through the panicked shouting of the defense table. The moment the wire transfer from Eleanor Sterling cleared my designated accounts yesterday afternoon, I immediately initiated a secondary permanent transfer. I did not keep a single cent of the Sterling family's illicit wealth. Vance scrambled closer to the screen, his eyes darting frantically across the digital text. He was desperately searching for a routing number, a Cayman Island bank code, a Swiss proxy account, anything his legal team could target with a subpoena. Instead, his eyes landed on the recipient name clearly printed in bold black letters. The blood completely drained from his face. I donated the entire sum, Maya announced, her tone ringing with pristine, untouchable victory. Every last dollar was transferred directly to the National Coalition Against Domestic Abuse. It is a highly respected, heavily audited, federally protected charity that provides emergency housing, legal defense, and covert relocation services for women and children escaping toxic, abusive environments. Eleanor's mouth fell open in a silent, horrifying scream. Her mind simply could not process the words. $34 million. The very last lifeblood of the Sterling Empire. the only money that could have saved her from a federal penitentiary, given away to a charity. "Your Honor, this is an illegal dissipation of assets!" Vance shrieked, his professional composure completely shattering. "This is an egregious, calculated fraud. The court must immediately claw back those funds. They belong to the Internal Revenue Service. They belong to my clients. You cannot allow a witness to simply give away $34 million of disputed marital assets." Maya smiled coldly from the corner of the screen. It was not a smile of joy or happiness. It was the smile of a woman who had meticulously orchestrated the absolute permanent destruction of her abusers. "You cannot claw back a single dime, Mr. Vance," Maya stated firmly, staring directly at Eleanor's pale, horrified face. The charity's board of directors held an emergency session and formally accepted the donation this morning. The funds have already been cleared, fully taxed, and legally secured within their federal endowments. Attempting to seize that money now would require the federal government to actively steal $34 million from a protected charity that shelters abused women. It is completely legally untouchable. The sterling money is permanently gone. Eleanor's eyes rolled back into her head, all remaining strength entirely evaporated from her body. She collapsed violently backward into her hard wooden chair, her chained hands dropping like dead weights against her lap. The sterile fluorescent glare of the federal courthouse stripped away the very last illusion of the Sterling family's invincibility. Eleanor's collapse sent a dull thud echoing through the cavernous room. The heavy steel chains binding her wrists slid off her lap, clanking loudly against the floor. Harrison Vance, the high-priced shark who had been shouting just seconds prior, stood completely frozen at the podium. His mouth hung open. He looked at the massive monitor, then down at his client, realizing simultaneously that his defense was obliterated and his final legal fees would never be paid. Marcus remained entirely catatonic. He stared blankly at his laceless institutional shoes, his eyes completely vacant as his fragile mind retreated from the absolute terror of his new reality. The profound silence in the courtroom was suddenly shattered by a wet, guttural sound. It started as a low wheeze in the back of Eleanor's throat and rapidly escalated into a full-blown, hysterical wail. The matriarch of the Sterling Empire, a woman who had spent decades meticulously cultivating an image of icy, untouchable perfection, completely unraveled. She scrambled forward, her chest-heaving tears carving thick tracks through her greasy, unkempt makeup. "Your Honor, please," Eleanor begged, her voice cracking as she threw her chained hands onto the defense table. "You cannot let her do this to me. You cannot let her take everything." Judge Caldwell did not blink. She looked down at the sobbing woman with eyes that held the exact temperature of liquid nitrogen. Eleanor desperately changed her tactics, pivoting instantly from outraged victim to a devastated, helpless matriarch. She looked up at the bench, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks, playing the absolute last card she had left in her rapidly diminishing deck. "Forget the money," Eleanor cried, her voice echoing with manufactured, desperate anguish. "Keep the money. But please, Your Honor, I am begging you as a mother. I am begging you as a grandmother. Do not let that woman take my grandsons away from me. They are my flesh and blood. They are the Sterling heirs. You cannot let her steal my family's legacy. They are all I have left of my family name." Marcus suddenly jolted awake from his catatonia, nodding frantically beside his mother. "My sons!" he gasped, his voice trembling violently. "She is kidnapping my sons." On the main courtroom monitor, Maya did not exhibit a single ounce of sympathy. She watched Eleanor's theatrical breakdown with the detached clinical interest of a scientist observing a highly predictable experiment. Maya leaned forward, resting her elbows elegantly on her pristine white desk. "They aren't Sterlings," Maya stated. Her voice cut through Eleanor's hysterical sobbing like a finely sharpened scalpel. The absolute certainty in her tone forced the entire courtroom into stunned silence. Eleanor choked on her tears, her head snapping up to stare at the screen in pure, uncomprehending horror. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor rasped, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. "They carry my son's blood. They carry our name." Maya simply smiled, a cold, triumphant expression that conveyed absolute victory. She tapped her keyboard.
The irrevocable transfer receipt for the $34 million vanished from the courtroom monitor. It was instantly replaced by two highly detailed, officially stamped government documents. They were standard state birth certificates bearing the heavy embossed seal of the Vital Records Office. Judge Caldwell adjusted her reading glasses, leaning forward to examine the documents displayed on her screen. "As you can clearly see, Your Honor," Maya explained, her voice ringing clearly through the courtroom speakers. Marcus Sterling was not present for the birth of his children. He abandoned me in the hospital to attend a luxury dinner with his mistress. Furthermore, at the exact time these birth certificates were legally filed with the state, there was an active court-ordered federal restraining order in place against both Marcus and Eleanor Sterling. Maya paused, allowing the absolute gravity of her words to sink into the minds of everyone present. Because of his documented absence, and because of the severe legal restrictions placed upon him due to his own violent actions, Marcus forfeited his right to be present for the registration. Maya continued smoothly. "I possessed full, uncontested legal authority to complete the birth certificates exactly as I saw fit. I left the space for the father's name entirely blank." Marcus let out a strangled, suffocating sound. He stared at the giant monitor, his eyes tracking across the digital documents. Maya tapped the screen, highlighting the top section of both certificates in bright yellow. "They do not carry your name." "Eleanor," Maya declared, staring directly into the camera. "They carry my maiden name. They are legally permanently registered as Leo Caldwell and Oliver Caldwell. The Sterling name does not appear anywhere on their legal documentation, nor will it ever appear in their lives." Eleanor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The air had been completely vacuumed from her lungs. The Sterling name, the very foundation of her arrogant, elitist identity, the legacy she had lied, stolen, and destroyed lives to protect, had been entirely erased. "You spent 4 years telling me I was not worthy of the Sterling name," Maya said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "You told me I was street trash. You told me I was a filthy complication staining your pristine bloodline. Well, Eleanor, you finally got exactly what you wanted. I am no longer a Sterling, and neither are my sons." Maya leaned back in her plush leather chair, her dark eyes locking onto Eleanor's shattered, horrified face. "Your bloodline ends here in this courtroom," Eleanor, Maya stated with absolute terrifying finality. "You have no money. You have no legacy. You have no heirs. You have absolutely nothing." Eleanor let out a visceral, agonizing scream. She thrashed against her shackles, lunging wildly toward the massive monitor, as if she could physically reach through the digital feed and tear Maya apart. The heavy steel chain snapped taut, jerking her violently backward. Two heavily armed federal marshals instantly descended upon the defense table, grabbing Eleanor by the shoulders and forcefully pinning her back into her wooden chair. Judge Caldwell had seen absolutely enough. She looked down at the defense table, her expression radiating profound, uncompromising disgust. She did not look at Harrison Vance. She did not look at the federal prosecutor. She looked directly at Eleanor and Marcus Sterling, two criminals who had finally run out of lies, money, and victims to exploit. "This court has heard ample evidence today regarding the character, the flight risk, and the profound criminal liability of the defendants," Judge Caldwell announced, her voice booming with absolute authority. Given the staggering magnitude of the financial fraud, the documented history of witness tampering, and the deeply disturbing evidence of extortion and bigotry presented in this very room, the decision of this court is absolute. Judge Caldwell picked up her heavy wooden gavel. She raised it high into the air. "Bail is denied," Judge Caldwell declared forcefully. "The defendants are remanded immediately to federal custody pending trial. May God have mercy on your souls, because this court certainly will not." She slammed the gavel down onto the sounding block. The sharp, deafening crack echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, sealing the absolute and final destruction of the Sterling Empire. As the reverberation of the heavy wooden gavel faded into the high vaulted ceiling, absolute chaos erupted at the defense table. Federal marshals immediately converged on Eleanor and Marcus, gripping their arms with uncompromising force to haul them toward the holding cells.
The gallery behind them erupted into a cacophony of shocked whispers, frantic typing, and muffled gasps as reporters scrambled to transmit the breaking news to their networks. Amidst the swirling, panicked commotion, Jessica saw her window. She slowly, carefully slid backward on the hard wooden bench, inching her way away from the epicenter of the legal disaster. Her mother-in-law was ruined. Her husband was penniless and headed for a federal penitentiary. But Jessica was wearing a pristine $5,000 Chanel suit, and she had absolute zero intention of trading it for an institutional orange jumpsuit. She kept her head down, clutching her designer handbag tightly against her ribs. She slipped out of the row, keeping the frantic standing reporters between herself and the judge's bench. Her heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribcage, but a cold, calculating thrill washed over her. She was actually going to make it. She had completely separated her personal checking accounts from Marcus's illicit businesses months ago. She just needed to make it to the downtown parking garage, start her Mercedes, and disappear to her sister's sprawling estate in the Hamptons until the media dust finally settled. She reached the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom, pressed her palm against the brass handle, and pushed. The door did not budge. Jessica frowned, pushing harder with her shoulder. Before she could throw her full body weight against the heavy wood, the doors swung inward with violent force, causing her to stumble backward in her heels. Two towering federal agents wearing dark suits, earpieces, and severe expressions stepped squarely into the doorway. They stood shoulder to shoulder, completely blocking her exit. "Excuse me," Jessica snapped instinctively, reverting to her haughty, entitled persona. "I am a spectator. I need to leave this room. Move out of my way immediately." The agents did not blink. They did not shift a single inch. Instead, the lead agent reached out and firmly gripped her wrist. Judge Caldwell's voice sliced through the rising courtroom chatter, amplified by the bench microphone. "You are not going anywhere, Mrs. Sterling." Jessica froze the blood in her veins, turning to ice water. She turned her head slowly. The entire courtroom had fallen dead silent, and every single eye was locked directly on her. Maya's voice resonated from the massive audiovisual monitor, calm, precise, and razor-sharp. "Your Honor, before this court adjourns, there is one final matter of public record that must be addressed today. As a certified forensic accountant, I did not solely audit the corporate shell companies Eleanor and Marcus utilized. I also conducted a comprehensive independent audit of the Sterling Family Philanthropic Foundation, specifically the annual charity galas that Jessica personally managed." Jessica's breath hitched in her throat. A wave of profound, suffocating nausea rolled through her stomach. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at the giant screen. "This hearing is about them. I have nothing to do with their business." Maya simply tapped a key on her laptop. The courtroom monitors shifted from the birth certificates to a dizzying array of highlighted spreadsheets, internal bank transfers, and highly classified expense reports. For the past 6 years, Jessica has served as the chairwoman for the Sterling Foundation's Children's Hospital Gala. Maya stated, her tone entirely clinical and detached. The public relations narrative aggressively claimed these events raised millions for pediatric cancer research. However, the financial reality is glaringly different. Jessica systematically embezzled over $4 million directly from the charity's operational funds. "Lies!" Jessica shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, high-frequency frenzy as she tried to yank her arm away from the federal agent. "She is lying. I raised that money. I paid the vendors. You cannot listen to her." Maya did not even pause her presentation. She routed the stolen capital through a highly sophisticated series of fraudulent vendor invoices. Maya continued smoothly. She listed phantom catering companies, fictitious floral arrangements, and imaginary event planners. The money was funneled directly into her personal offshore accounts. She utilized pediatric cancer donations to fund her luxury European vacations, her custom sports cars, and her extensive collection of high-end diamond jewelry. The gallery gasped collectively. Reporters furiously documented every single word. "But that is not the most egregious part of her operation," Maya said, her dark eyes flashing with a righteous, furious intensity.
When the foundation's junior accountants began noticing the massive financial discrepancies 2 years ago, Jessica did not just cover her tracks. She needed a scapegoat. She intentionally manipulated the internal accounting software to frame 3 different minority employees for the missing cash. The courtroom erupted into outraged murmurs. Judge Caldwell leaned so far over the bench she looked ready to physically strike Jessica herself. Maya brought up 3 employee files on the screen. She targeted a Hispanic catering manager, an African-American junior bookkeeper, and a first-generation immigrant event coordinator. She fabricated email chains and falsified digital signatures to make it look like they were skimming off the top. 2 of those innocent women were fired and subsequently blacklisted from their industries. One of them, a single mother, was nearly prosecuted before she was forced into personal bankruptcy just to pay her legal defense fees. Jessica destroyed their lives simply to buy herself another closet full of designer shoes. I have transmitted the complete forensic audit, including the original IP logs, tracing the fraudulent framing directly to Jessica's personal laptop to the federal prosecutor's office, Maya concluded. The evidence is absolute and undeniable. The lead prosecutor looked up from his glowing laptop screen, his face tight with unmasked disgust. We have received the files, Your Honor. The IP logs are verified. We have an active signed warrant for the immediate arrest of Jessica Sterling for charity fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, and severe obstruction of justice. Jessica's knees buckled completely. The federal agent gripping her wrist immediately yanked her upright, spinning her around with brutal, practiced efficiency. No! Jessica screamed, her voice cracking as the cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs slammed shut around her wrists. The metallic click echoed loudly over the angry murmurs of the crowd. This is a mistake. I am a Sterling. You cannot do this to me. I have immunity. I brought you the tape. You have absolutely nothing, Judge Caldwell stated, her voice practically vibrating with contempt. You are a parasite who stole from sick children and ruined innocent lives to fund your own vanity. Take her away. Jessica thrashed wildly against the agents, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face, her expensive designer heels slipping on the polished marble floor. Eleanor! She shrieked, twisting her neck violently to look at the defense table. Eleanor, do something. Call Vance. Use the family trust. Tell them I had nothing to do with it. Help me. Eleanor Sterling sat slumped in her chair, her hands shackled to her waist. She did not look up. She did not flinch. She simply stared blankly at the floor, utterly hollowed out, her entire empire reduced to ashes. She offered absolutely no reaction as her elite white daughter-in-law was dragged violently through the heavy oak doors, sobbing hysterically into the sterile courthouse hallway, completely and eternally ruined. Down in the subterranean belly of the federal courthouse, the logistical infrastructure was rapidly crumbling under the sheer weight of the Sterling family's sudden spectacular collapse. The holding area was designed for orderly, scheduled transfers, not the spontaneous, simultaneous incarceration of 3 high-profile corporate criminals. The sudden addition of Jessica thrashing and screaming as she was hauled into the processing center severely strained the available manpower. Marcus Sterling was shoved roughly against the cold concrete wall of the loading dock by a junior federal marshal. The heavy chains binding his wrists and ankles bit deep into his soft, pampered skin. For his entire life, Marcus had relied on his mother's wealth and his family's terrifying reputation to shield him from consequences. Now, staring at the bleak gray walls of the federal transport zone, his privileged reality fractured entirely. The catalyst for his escape was completely accidental. A separate transport van carrying several violent offenders from a maximum security facility arrived at the exact same dock. One of those prisoners, highly agitated and completely unrestrained in the back of the transport, violently kicked the rear doors open the second a guard approached. A chaotic, brutal scuffle instantly erupted on the concrete floor. The sudden violence drew the immediate attention of every marshal in the vicinity. The junior marshal guarding Marcus instinctively stepped forward, his hand dropping to his service weapon, turning his back on his high-profile prisoner for just a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Marcus needed. A sudden feral surge of pure adrenaline flooded his system.
He did not overthink it. He did not weigh the legal consequences of fleeing federal custody. He simply moved. Marcus shoved his cuffed hands downward, twisting his body violently to the side and slipping behind a massive concrete support pillar. He moved with a rat-like desperation, shuffling quickly into the shadows of the expansive maintenance garage. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the echoing shouts of the marshals struggling to contain the melee at the loading dock. He spotted his salvation sitting near the service elevator. It was a white municipal maintenance van, its engine idling loudly. The driver, a courthouse electrician in dirty overalls, had stepped out to smoke a cigarette, completely mesmerized by the violent brawl unfolding 50 yards away. Marcus lunged out of the shadows. He threw his chained body into the driver's seat, slamming the heavy door shut. The electrician turned, shouting in alarm and dropping his cigarette, but it was too late. Marcus contorted his body, managing to wedge his cuffed hands around the steering wheel and awkwardly slamming his foot down on the gas pedal. The heavy van lurched forward with a screech of tires. Marcus aimed the heavy steel grille directly at the wooden exit barricade. He hit it at 40 miles an hour, shattering the barrier into wooden splinters and launching the van out into the chaotic, traffic-clogged streets of the city. He drove like a madman, weaving erratically through the gridlock, his eyes darting frantically to the rearview mirror. The wail of police sirens began to echo in the distance, a terrifying symphony of his impending capture. The spoiled, arrogant heir to the sterling fortune was dead. He was now a desperate, cornered animal. He had no money, no allies, and the entire weight of the federal government was mobilizing to hunt him down. He needed a destination. He needed leverage. His frantic mind raced through the ruins of his life, desperately searching for a blind spot in the federal dragnet. Maya had liquidated his accounts. She had donated the extorted $34 million. She had legally stripped his name from his own children. But there was one tangible asset: she still controlled something she owned completely separate from the Sterling Empire. 6 years ago, before they were even married, Maya had purchased a secluded off-the-grid cabin deep in the rural countryside. She bought it with her own money, registering it under a private trust that Eleanor's accountants had never bothered to audit because they considered it an insignificant, worthless property. Marcus gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. It was the absolute perfect safe house. It was miles away from any major highway, surrounded by dense forest and completely untethered from the frozen Sterling assets. If Maya was hiding the twins anywhere to keep them out of the media spotlight, it was there. He ripped the van off the main highway, taking a sharp exit that led toward the winding, desolate rural routes. The sun began to sink below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and bleeding red. The transition from manicured city streets to overgrown, twisting country roads matched the dark, violent shift occurring inside his own mind. 2 hours later, deep into the isolated countryside, Marcus pulled the stolen maintenance van off the main road. He parked behind a rusted dumpster outside a small, independent hardware store. The building was dark, the closed sign flipped in the window, the owner having locked up hours ago. Marcus awkwardly shifted his body, bringing his chained hands up to his face. He wrapped his hands in a dirty rag he found on the van's passenger seat. He stepped out into the freezing night air, walked directly up to the front door of the hardware store, and smashed his bound fist through the plate glass window. The glass shattered loudly, raining down onto the concrete. Marcus ignored the sharp pain slicing through his arms. He reached through the jagged hole, unlocking the deadbolt and pushing his way inside. The store was dark and silent. He moved methodically down the narrow aisles, driven by a cold, singular purpose. He found the tool aisle and grabbed a heavy, solid steel crowbar. He tested its weight, his eyes gleaming in the dark. He then moved to the sporting goods section. He smashed a glass display case with the crowbar, reaching in to retrieve a 12-inch serrated hunting knife. He tucked the heavy blade securely into his waistband. Marcus climbed back into the stolen van, throwing the crowbar onto the passenger seat. He threw the vehicle into drive, his tires kicking up a cloud of gravel as he accelerated back onto the deserted blacktop. The cabin was only 20 miles away. He stared into the pitch-black night, stretching out ahead of his headlights, his face twisting into a terrifying, unhinged grimace. Maya had taken his legacy, she had taken his freedom, she had taken his fortune, but she was not going to take his blood. "If I cannot have the money," Marcus muttered into the empty freezing cab, his voice trembling with manic homicidal certainty, "I will take my kids, and no one is going to stop me." The stolen maintenance van violently bounced and swerved along the deeply rutted gravel path. The headlights sliced through the dense, suffocating pine forest, illuminating twisting branches that looked like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab the vehicle. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity. His erratic breathing fogged the cold windshield. He had driven over an hour off the main interstate, navigating through a labyrinth of unmarked county roads to reach these specific coordinates. Maya had always loved this property for its absolute isolation. She had purchased it precisely because it was miles away from cellular towers, local law enforcement, and nosy neighbors. That exact isolation was now going to be her ultimate undoing. He killed the headlights a quarter-mile from the property line. He let the van idle forward in the pitch-black night, the crunch of the gravel under the heavy tires sounding deafening in the dead silence of the wilderness. He shifted the gear into park behind a thick grove of ancient cedar trees, completely obscuring the municipal vehicle from the main house. Marcus sat in the freezing cab for a moment, his chest heaving. He unbuttoned the top of his ruined, sweat-stained dress shirt. He grabbed the heavy steel crowbar from the passenger seat. He tucked the 12-inch serrated hunting knife securely into the waistband of his trousers. The cold metal pressed sharply against his skin, sending a thrilling electric jolt of absolute power straight into his central nervous system. He was no longer the pampered trust fund heir cowering in a federal courtroom. He was a predator. He stepped out into the freezing wind, his expensive leather dress shoes sinking immediately into the damp, freezing mud. He stalked silently toward the clearing. The sprawling two-story timber cabin emerged from the shadows. It sat perfectly still against the backdrop of the dark mountain ridge. Every single window was completely blacked out. There were no vehicles parked in the gravel roundabout. There were no visible security cameras mounted on the eaves. Maya had fled the city in an absolute panic, abandoning the massive private security detail that usually surrounded her. She thought she was being clever. She thought hiding in the dark off the grid would protect her from the fallout of the Sterling family's destruction. Marcus sneered, his breath pluming in the freezing air. She was nothing but a cowardly, weak woman without his family's money to protect her. He completely bypassed the heavy oak front door, knowing it would be secured by heavy deadbolts. Instead, he crept silently around the perimeter of the wraparound porch, his boots gliding softly over the damp wooden planks. He moved to the rear of the cabin, locating the expansive sliding glass doors that led directly into the main living room. Marcus did not hesitate. He raised the solid steel crowbar high above his right shoulder. He swung it forward with a violent grunting exertion of pure force. The heavy steel collided with the reinforced glass. The massive pane exploded inward with a deafening, catastrophic crash. Thousands of jagged, glittering shards rained down onto the hardwood floor inside, shattering the absolute silence of the wilderness. He waited for a beat, his adrenaline spiking, listening for screams or the frantic rush of footsteps. There was absolutely nothing, total unbroken silence. He stepped through the ruined doorframe, the broken glass crunching violently under his heavy boots. The interior of the living room was pitch black, smelling faintly of cedar wood and dust. Marcus pulled the hunting knife from his waistband, clutching the rubberized grip so tightly his hand shook. He navigated slowly through the dark, tracing the outline of the heavy leather furniture and the massive stone fireplace. He moved toward the center of the house, his eyes adjusting to the absolute lack of light. He stood at the base of the wide wooden staircase leading to the second-floor bedrooms. He paused, holding his breath, listening intently. Then he heard it. A low, rhythmic hum drifted down from the upstairs hallway. It was accompanied by the distinct, unmistakable static crackle of a baby monitor. A dark, twisted smile stretched across his face. He had found them. The absolute arrogance of this woman thinking she could steal his legacy and hide his sons in the woods. He pictured her cowering in the dark upstairs, terrified of the loud crash, clutching the boys to her chest, completely defenseless. Marcus began his ascent. He placed his feet carefully on the outer edges of the wooden stairs to avoid making a single creaking sound. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, his blood boiling with homicidal anticipation. The static crackle from the monitor grew steadily louder with every step he took. He reached the second-floor landing. The faint sound of the electronic static was originating from the last door on the right. The nursery. Marcus gripped the hunting knife in his right hand and the heavy crowbar in his left. He stepped silently down the hallway, stopping directly outside the closed wooden door. He did not bother turning the handle. Marcus raised his boot and kicked the door open with a massive splintering crash. The door slammed violently against the interior wall. He stepped into the room, raising the blade, his eyes sweeping the space to claim his prize. His manic smile instantly vanished. The two wooden cribs sitting in the center of the room were completely empty. There were no blankets. There were no toys. The entire room was totally barren, save for a single cheap baby monitor resting on a plastic folding chair in the center of the floor, broadcasting a continuous loop of white noise. A sickening wave of profound confusion crashed over him. Before his brain could process the empty room, a battery of high-intensity military-grade floodlights suddenly ignited outside. The blinding, brilliant white light poured violently through the nursery windows, completely eradicating the shadows and blinding him instantly. Marcus stumbled backward, raising his arm to shield his face from the searing glare. A booming, electronically amplified voice ripped through the night air, echoing from a massive megaphone outside. "Drop the weapon, Marcus. You are trespassing on federal property." The blinding white light seared through Marcus's retinas, completely obliterating his night vision in a fraction of a second. He threw his free arm across his face, staggering backward over the splintered remains of the nursery door he had just destroyed. Panic, sharp and tasting of copper, flooded the back of his throat. The heavy steel crowbar suddenly felt like 1,000,000 pounds in his left hand, while the serrated hunting knife in his right burned against his sweating palm. He frantically blinked, trying to pierce the wall of pure, agonizing illumination that poured through the second-story windows. Heavy synchronized footsteps echoed loudly from the ground floor, stomping aggressively over the shattered glass of the sliding doors. The distinct, terrifying mechanical clatter of high-powered rifles being racked and chambered reverberated through the wooden bones of the cabin. He was not alone in the wilderness. He had never been alone. From the pitch-black void of the hallway directly outside the aggressive perimeter of the floodlights, a figure moved. The steady, rhythmic click of low heels against the hardwood floor cut through the heavy, suffocating silence of the house. Maya stepped effortlessly into the harsh perimeter of the light. She was not cowering in a corner. She was not clutching their children in terror, waiting to be rescued. She was wearing a perfectly tailored beige cashmere sweater and dark slacks, looking entirely unbothered, as though she had just enjoyed a relaxing evening by a roaring fire. In her right hand, she held a delicate porcelain teacup, fragrant steam rising softly from the rim. She took a slow, deliberate sip, her dark eyes locked onto his sweating, panicked, and mud-splattered face. Immediately behind her, materializing rapidly from the shadows of the guest bedrooms and the lower stairwell, a dozen heavily armored United States Marshals stepped into view. Their tactical gear absorbed the light. Kevlar vests bearing the word police in bold yellow lettering pressed forward, completely sealing off the hallway. The red laser sights of their assault rifles sliced through the dust motes, suspended in the air, painting Marcus's chest and forehead with a dozen lethal glowing dots. Marcus opened his mouth, but his vocal cords were completely paralyzed. The manic, homicidal rage that had fueled his desperate, reckless drive through the mountains instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, icy terror. He stood frozen, a bleeding, dirty fugitive holding stolen hardware store tools, staring down the barrel of the federal government. Maya slowly lowered her teacup, resting it gently on the wooden railing of the landing. She looked at him with an expression of profound clinical disappointment. "You really thought you were hunting me," Maya stated, her voice smooth, calm, and echoing with absolute authority in the empty nursery.
You genuinely believed that you outsmarted the federal justice system, evaded a coordinated manhunt, and tracked me down to my secret, unprotected sanctuary. Maya shook her head slowly, a cold, mocking smile touching the corners of her mouth. You are so violently, pathetically predictable, Marcus. As a forensic analyst, I do not just track where the money goes. I study the behavioral algorithms and risk trajectories of the criminals who steal it. Mapping out your arrogant, impulsive psychology was the absolute easiest calculation I have ever made in my entire professional career. She took a slow step forward, completely unfazed by the weapons still gripped in his trembling, bloody hands. Did you honestly think it was a lucky coincidence that the transport van at the courthouse experienced a massive security lapse at the exact moment your bailiff turned his back? Maya asked, her tone dripping with academic condescension. Did you truly believe a municipal maintenance vehicle was just left idling in the loading dock keys, conveniently in the ignition, perfectly positioned for your grand dramatic escape? Marcus's eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribcage as his mind scrambled to process the horrific magnitude of her words. He had not escaped. He had been guided. He had been herded. I needed you to accumulate a few more federal charges to guarantee you never see the outside of a maximum security penitentiary for the rest of your natural life. Maya explained, her voice devoid of any sympathy. Fleeing federal custody, grand theft auto, breaking and entering, destruction of property, and now armed trespass and attempted assault on a federal witness. The local authorities would have picked you up at the county line 2 hours ago, but I expressly asked the tactical command to let you run. I needed you to walk directly into this specific trap. Marcus shook his head frantically, his breathing devolving into rapid, shallow gasps. He looked wildly at the empty cribs, the cheap baby monitor broadcasting static, and the wall of heavily armed federal agents waiting for him to make a single wrong move. How Marcus choked out his voice, cracking into a pathetic whimper. How did you know I would come here? Maya's smile widened into a mask of pure, untouchable superiority. Because I planted the seed myself, she replied smoothly. 3 weeks ago, during the initial asset discovery phase of our divorce, I intentionally left the original property deed to this specific cabin sitting completely visible on the top of my old office files. I knew your fragile, controlling ego could not resist snooping through my private documents when you thought I was not looking. I knew you would memorize the rural address, arrogantly thinking you had discovered my ultimate weakness. I purchased this property explicitly to serve as a designated federal staging ground for this exact moment. Maya took another step closer, the red lasers holding steady on Marcus's chest. You did not track me down, Marcus. You followed a breadcrumb trail designed for a rat, and you walked straight into a cage. My children are hundreds of miles away in a secure location you will never find. The reality of his absolute, inescapable destruction crashed down on Marcus with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. The entire Sterling Empire was gone. His mother was rotting in a holding cell. His sister-in-law was arrested. His fortune had been given away to charity. And his wife, the woman he had underestimated, abused, and entirely dismissed as intellectually inferior, had completely outmaneuvered him, turning his own violent desperation into a weapon against him. He looked down at his ruined clothes, the mud on his shoes, the cuts on his hands from the shattered hardware store window. He had absolutely nothing left. His fingers went completely numb. The heavy steel crowbar slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly against the wooden floorboards. A fraction of a second later, the serrated hunting knife followed, bouncing harmlessly away toward the wall. Marcus's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the floor, the heavy steel chains around his ankles rattling loudly against the hardwood. All of his arrogance, his elite entitlement, and his violent rage completely dissolved into a pathetic, hysterical mess. He threw his chained hands up, tears streaming rapidly down his pale face, snot running from his nose as he completely broke down. Maya, please. Marcus wailed, his voice echoing with frantic, sickening desperation. He crawled forward on his knees, ignoring the warning shouts of the marshals. Please, I am sorry. I was out of my mind. I lost everything today. I did not mean any of it. Please forgive me. You are my wife. I love you. Maya, please." Maya did not blink. She simply stared down at the broken, weeping shell of the man who had tormented her for years. Her expression remained entirely devoid of mercy, devoid of pity, and devoid of love. She took one final step forward and slowly raised her hand. The movement was swift, precise, and completely stripped of any frantic emotional hysteria. The sharp, deafening crack of her palm colliding with his cheek echoed through the empty, high-vaulted nursery like a gunshot. The sheer physical force of the impact snapped Marcus's head violently to the side. A bright, angry red handprint instantly began to bloom across his pale, tear-stained skin, stark against the grime and dried mud smudged across his jaw. He gasped a pathetic choking sound as his body slumped further into the polished floorboards, completely immobilized by the stunning reality of the blow. Maya did not scream, she did not yell, she did not launch into a furious, tearful monologue about the years of emotional abuse, the blatant infidelity, or the systematic financial manipulation she had endured. She did not waste a single breath demanding explanations or seeking closure from a man entirely incapable of providing it. The slap was not a loss of control. It was the absolute definitive reassertion of it. The physical release of tension in the room was a tangible, heavy thing settling over the space like the dust disturbed by his forced entry. It was the punctuation mark at the end of a long, agonizing sentence that she had been writing for months. Marcus reeled from the strike, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked up at her, his jaw trembling, waiting for the screaming match that he had been conditioned to expect the argument he thought he could twist and manipulate to his advantage. It never came. Maya slowly leaned down, bending at the knees, so her face was mere inches from his. The smell of his terror mixed with cheap hardware store grease and the damp, freezing earth of the forest made her nostrils flare in mild disgust. Her dark eyes bored directly into his wide, terrified pupils, trapping him in a gaze entirely devoid of human warmth. "You told me Chloe gave you freedom," Maya whispered. Her voice was a cold, razor-sharp blade, slicing effortlessly through the quiet hum of the baby monitor. "Congratulations! You are about to get 15 years of freedom in a federal penitentiary." Marcus opened his mouth to formulate a response, but only a dry, rattling sob emerged from his throat. The finality of her words crushed the last remaining fragments of his resistance. He had absolutely no cards left to play. His wealth was gone. His family was destroyed. His leverage was a phantom. Maya slowly stood back up, smoothing an invisible crease from her beige cashmere sweater. She offered a subtle dismissing nod to the tactical team surrounding them. The lead United States Marshal immediately stepped forward, his heavy tactical boots thudding against the floorboards, breaking the frozen tableau. Two massive, heavily armored agents descended on Marcus. They gripped his shoulders with uncompromising, brutal efficiency, hauling him violently to his feet. Marcus's legs failed him completely, his expensive mud-caked shoes dragging uselessly against the hardwood floor as he refused to support his own weight. The heavy steel chains binding his wrists clattered loudly as the agent secured his arms firmly behind his back, locking their iron grips onto his biceps to ensure he could not struggle. They did not treat him like the pampered heir to a billion-dollar real estate empire. They did not care about his last name, his elite country club memberships, or the expensive custom suits hanging in his abandoned closet. They treated him exactly like what he was, a dangerous, desperate fugitive who had just assaulted a federal facility and threatened a protected witness. They marched him aggressively out of the nursery, dragging his dead weight down the hallway and toward the wooden staircase. Marcus offered absolutely no physical resistance. He wept openly, a continuous pathetic stream of broken apologies and incomprehensible babble spilling from his mouth as they hauled him down the stairs. He called out her name, begging for a second chance, pleading for a mercy he had never once shown her. Maya followed at a slow, measured pace. She walked calmly down the stairs, her hand trailing lightly along the banister. She carefully stepped over the shattered glass scattered across the living room floor, her face entirely impassive. She watched with total detachment as the marshals dragged her former husband out through the ruined doorframe and into the freezing floodlit night. A fleet of black federal SUVs was parked haphazardly across the front lawn, their flashing red and blue strobe lights painting the surrounding pine trees in violent rhythmic bursts of color. The harsh glare illuminated the desolate landscape, cutting through the isolation of the property. The lead agent marched Marcus directly toward the nearest vehicle. He opened the heavy rear door, placed a firm hand on the top of Marcus's head to protect it from the doorframe, and shoved him roughly into the cramped, caged back seat. The heavy door slammed shut with a definitive metallic thud that echoed loudly into the dark woods, a sound of absolute finality. Marcus pressed his bruised, tear-stained face against the reinforced glass of the window. His breath fogged the cold pain as he stared back at the illuminated porch, looking directly at the woman he had severely underestimated his entire life. Maya stood perfectly still on the wooden deck, her posture straight, her expression entirely unreadable. She did not wave, she did not smile. She offered no final gesture of triumph. She simply watched as the engine of the massive SUV roared to life, a low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the ground. The caravan of federal vehicles began to move. The heavy tires crunched loudly against the gravel driveway, turning in a synchronized line and accelerating back toward the long, winding country road. Maya watched the glowing red taillights navigate through the dense tree line, the flashing strobes growing smaller and smaller, painting brief flashes of color against the tree trunks until they were completely swallowed by the pitch-black wilderness. The deafening roar of the engines slowly faded, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the ancient cedar branches. The blinding tactical floodlights snapped off, returning the remote cabin to its natural, secluded darkness. Maya closed her eyes. She inhaled a deep, slow breath of the crisp, freezing night air, letting the pure, untainted oxygen fill her lungs completely. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on her chest for the last 10 years finally lift, evaporating into the cold atmosphere. She opened her eyes, looking up at the vast star-filled sky stretching out endlessly above the property. It was finally over. The vast star-filled night sky slowly dissolved into the sterile, unforgiving fluorescent glare of a federal penitentiary. 3 years evaporated in the blink of an eye. The relentless grinding wheels of the justice system had systematically crushed the sterling empire into a fine, worthless powder, scattering the disgraced family members to the absolute lowest, most humiliating corners of the country. Eleanor Sterling knelt on the damp, freezing linoleum floor of a maximum security cell block. Her arthritic knees ached violently against the hard, unyielding tiles. She gripped a cheap plastic scrub brush in her right hand, her knuckles white swollen and stripped of the heavy diamond rings that used to adorn them. The woman who had once commanded global boardrooms, crushed corporate competitors with a single phone call, and worn custom-tailored Italian silk was now dressed in a shapeless, faded khaki uniform. The coarse fabric chafed her skin and smelled perpetually of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and institutional despair. Her signature immaculate hairstyle was completely gone. Her hair now hung in thin, greasy steel gray strands around her hollowed-out, deeply lined face. She plunged the stiff bristles of the brush into the toilet bowl, scrubbing furiously at a stubborn rust stain near the rim. The foul chemical stench of the cleaning solution burned her throat and watered her eyes. But she did not stop. She could not stop. "Sterling! You missed a spot!" A harsh, booming voice barked from the doorway. Eleanor flinched instinctively. She slowly turned her head to look at the towering corrections officer leaning casually against the thick steel bars of the cell. The guard chewed a piece of gum, her eyes full of absolute undisguised disdain. "I said you missed a spot, inmate 87402. The guard repeated, tapping her heavy wooden baton against the metal doorframe. The sharp clanging sound echoed down the long concrete cell block, sounding exactly like the judge's heavy wooden gavel that had sealed her doom. "Do it again. And this time, put some actual physical effort into it." Eleanor swallowed her pride. The bitter metallic taste of absolute defeat coated her tongue. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor whispered, her voice a raspy, broken shadow of its former terrifyingly authoritative tone. She turned back to the toilet, plunging her raw, rubber-gloved hands into the dirty water.
There were no offshore trust funds to bail her out. There were no high-priced corporate lawyers to file emergency appeals. She had 15 years left on her sentence, and every single agonizing second of it was going to be spent entirely on her knees. Hundreds of miles away, the harsh, buzzing glare of a flickering neon sign cut through the humid night air just outside the city limits of Atlanta. The sign cast a sickly pink and yellow glow over the greasy, pothole-ridden asphalt of a 24-hour roadside diner parking lot. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating, reeking heavily of stale French fries, burnt coffee, and cheap cigarette smoke. Jessica pushed through the swinging metal doors of the kitchen carrying a massive, heavy plastic tray loaded with dirty, half-eaten plates of food. She wore a mustard-yellow polyester uniform that fit her terribly, complete with a grease-stained apron tied tightly around her waist. Her cheap rubber-soled shoes squeaked loudly against the sticky floor. She approached a messy Formica booth and began aggressively wiping down the spilled syrup with a damp, sour-smelling rag. A burly truck driver in a soiled baseball cap sat at the adjacent table, tapping his empty coffee mug impatiently against the hard surface. "Hey, sweetheart," he grunted loudly, snapping his thick, dirty fingers directly in her direction. "You want to bring a fresh pot over here before I die of old age?" Jessica's jaw tightened so hard her teeth ground together. Her eyes flashed with a brief, instinctual spark of her old, entitled rage. "Excuse me," she started to snap back, straightening her posture to deliver a withering insult. But the words died instantly in her dry throat. She caught a sudden glimpse of her own reflection in the grease-smeared glass of the rotating pie display case. The woman staring back at her was a complete, unrecognizable stranger. Her once flawless $5,000 salon highlights were completely gone, replaced by a cheap, brassy box dye job with dark, uneven roots showing severely at her scalp. Her skin was dull, broken out, and exhausted. Her hands, which used to hold crystal champagne flutes and designer handbags, were now red, raw, calloused, and chemically burned from industrial dish soap. She had absolutely no money. She had zero social standing. The elite wealthy circles of high society that she used to ruthlessly rule had entirely blacklisted her the exact second the federal indictments dropped. She was a convicted felon working the graveyard shift just to afford the monthly rent on a rat-infested trailer park apartment. "Right away," Sir Jessica mumbled softly, her voice completely dead and hollowed out. She grabbed the greasy glass coffee pot and walked over to fill his mug, entirely stripped of her pride, her wealth, and her dignity. Across town, in the deepest, most neglected sector of the city, Chloe was experiencing her own brand of suffocating, inescapable reality. She stood in the center of a cramped, dimly lit studio apartment. The tiny space was an absolute claustrophobic disaster. Dirty laundry covered the stained brown carpet. Unopened red-stamped final notice envelopes were piled perilously high on the tiny roach-infested kitchen counter. The building manager had shut the heat off 2 days ago, forcing her to wear a heavy moth-eaten winter coat indoors just to stop her teeth from chattering. She gripped her cracked smartphone tightly against her ear, pacing frantically back and forth in the microscopic living space. Her face was flushed red with frantic, desperate anger. "I already told you I do not have the money," Chloe screamed into the phone, her voice pitching into a hysterical, breaking shriek. "You cannot just garnish my wages. I can barely afford to eat right now." The collection agent on the other end of the line was entirely unmoved. He continued reading the standard legal warning, his voice a droning, robotic monotone that offered absolutely zero sympathy. Chloe slammed her fist violently against the cheap drywall. She had thrown away her entire life for Marcus Sterling. She had eagerly swallowed his lies about leaving Maya. She had foolishly believed the promises of luxury penthouses, private jets, and unlimited black cards. She genuinely thought she was securing her ultimate freedom and an effortless financial future. Instead, she had tied herself directly to a sinking ship. When Marcus went down in flames, he dragged her straight into the abyss alongside him. The federal investigators had systematically seized every single asset, vehicle, and piece of jewelry he had ever given her, leaving her drowning in a massive mountain of toxic, inescapable credit card debt. "I am not paying for his mistakes,"
Chloe sobbed into the receiver, completely breaking down. She slid down the wall, pulling her knees up to her chest as the tears ruined her cheap mascara. Please, you have to give me more time. The collector simply hung up the phone. A dial tone echoed loudly in Chloe's ear, a flat, continuous sound of total, absolute isolation. She dropped the phone onto the dirty floor and buried her face in her hands, entirely consumed by the ruin of her own greedy, pathetic choices. The camera slowly pulled back, moving away from the suffocating despair of Chloe's dingy, unwashed apartment window. It drifted out into the crisp, cool morning air, ascending rapidly past the grime, the poverty, and the shattered lives of those who had tried to destroy Maya. Higher and higher it soared, breaking effortlessly through the low-hanging gray clouds. As it rose, the first brilliant piercing rays of the morning sun crested the horizon. The pure golden light washed over the sprawling, magnificent skyline of modern Atlanta. The towering skyscrapers of glass and steel gleamed radiantly against the clear, endless blue sky. The city was awake, vibrant, and pulsing with undeniable power and a bright, beautiful new beginning. The bright, sunlit skyline of modern Atlanta seamlessly transitioned into the glittering, diamond-bright illumination of the grand ballroom at the St. Regis. 3 years had passed since that freezing, chaotic night in the remote mountain cabin. 3 years since the federal justice system had permanently erased the Sterling family from the high society rolls and locked them away in concrete cells. Tonight belonged entirely to Maya. The grand ballroom was packed to absolute capacity, but it was not filled with the arrogant old money aristocrats that Eleanor Sterling used to desperately court. There were no corrupt politicians, no shady real estate developers, and absolutely no silent, terrified wives trapped in designer cages. The room was electric, buzzing with a vibrant, undeniable energy. It was filled with top-tier federal prosecutors, brilliant forensic accountants, ruthless divorce attorneys, and most importantly, hundreds of powerful, fiercely independent women. These were survivors. Women who had navigated the darkest, most terrifying chapters of their lives and emerged completely victorious. They were gathered to celebrate the inaugural gala of the Caldwell Foundation. Maya had taken every single cent of the $34 million she had legally and brilliantly diverted from Marcus's offshore accounts and built an impenetrable fortress. The Caldwell Foundation provided elite legal representation, secure emergency housing, untraceable relocation services, and financial independence grants to women trapped in abusive high-net-worth marriages. Maya had weaponized her own trauma, turning the exact financial algorithms Marcus had used to control her into a limitless resource for liberation. Maya stood behind the sleek crystal podium at the center of the brightly lit stage. She placed her hands flat against the cool glass, taking a slow, steadying breath. She looked down at the front row, her heart swelling with an overwhelming protective love. Sitting at a prime VIP table, safely insulated from any shadows of their past, were her twins Leo and Aria. They were 5 years old now, healthy, vibrant, and incredibly happy. Aria was giggling loudly, trying to balance a polished silver spoon on her nose, while Leo clapped his hands in delight at her antics. They were completely oblivious to the brutal, calculated war their mother had waged to secure their absolute safety. They would never know the fear of walking on eggshells. They would never shrink themselves to accommodate a tyrant. They were free. Maya looked away from her beautiful children and swept her gaze across the silent, captivated audience. She was no longer the quiet, agreeable wife standing obediently in the background of country club photographs. She wore a stunning floor-length emerald green evening gown that projected absolute authority and untouchable grace. Her posture was flawless, her dark eyes sharp and commanding. The contrast between the terrified woman who had once bled on the hardwood floor of the Sterling estate and the titan commanding this ballroom was absolute. She exuded a calm, terrifying power that Eleanor Sterling could only have dreamed of possessing. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Maya began, her voice ringing clear, steady, and incredibly powerful through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered in this room to celebrate a fundamental shift in power.
For generations, certain individuals have operated under the arrogant delusion that wealth grants them absolute immunity. They believe that possessing a vast financial portfolio gives them the inherent right to control, manipulate, and destroy the lives of the people who depend on them. She paused, letting the heavy truth of her words settle over the silent, attentive crowd. I spent years trapped in a system designed to strip away my autonomy. Maya continued, maintaining direct eye contact with the survivors seated in the front rows. I was told that I was simply a line item on a balance sheet, a manageable asset, a quiet background figure meant to facilitate the success of a supposedly great man. I was surrounded by people who built empires out of intimidation and financed their luxurious lifestyles with cruelty. They hid their abuse behind towering iron gates and buried their crimes in offshore accounts, entirely confident that they would never face a reckoning. Maya offered a sharp, cold smile, her eyes flashing with undeniable triumph. But they made one catastrophic miscalculation. Maya stated, her voice echoing with commanding precision. They severely underestimated the women they tried to break. They believed that isolating us, monitoring our bank accounts, and threatening us with ruin would ensure our eternal silence. They failed to realize that when you back a mother into a corner, when you threaten the safety and future of her children, you do not create a victim. You forge an unstoppable force. Maya gestured toward the massive digital screens flanking the stage, which instantly displayed the staggering statistics of the Caldwell Foundation's first 3 years. Over 500 women safely relocated, $200 million in hidden assets legally uncovered and returned to rightful spouses. A flawless victory record in federal family court. We built this foundation to ensure that financial abuse can no longer be used as a weapon of mass destruction against families, Maya proclaimed, her voice rising with unyielding passion. We built a network of brilliant legal minds and forensic analysts who can tear down any corporate smokescreen. We have proven that no trust fund is untouchable, no secret account is untraceable, and absolutely no abuser is above the law. Maya looked back down at Leo and Aria. Aria waved a small, chubby hand frantically at her mother. Maya felt a profound, radiant warmth fill her chest, entirely chasing away the lingering cold of her past. The nightmare was truly over. The monsters were locked in cages, scrubbing floors and screaming into the void, completely erased from the beautiful, thriving world she had built. Maya gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward slightly as she delivered her final, devastatingly accurate assessment of the people who had tried to ruin her. They thought they could put a price tag on a mother's love, Maya declared, her voice echoing with absolute, undeniable triumph. They thought money could buy compliance. But they forgot the golden rule of accounting. When you invest in cruelty, your ultimate return will always be zero. For a fraction of a second, the grand ballroom was perfectly, breathlessly silent, and then it completely erupted. Hundreds of people leaped to their feet simultaneously. The applause was deafening, a roaring wave of validation, respect, and overwhelming victory that physically shook the crystal chandeliers above. Women cheered, elite lawyers raised their champagne glasses, and the rapid flashes of cameras illuminated the room in a brilliant, continuous strobe. Maya stood tall at the podium as the standing ovation washed over her like a warm tide. She looked down at her beautiful children, letting out a soft, joyful laugh as the applause thundered on. She had protected her family. She had destroyed her enemies. She had won. Maya smiled. The core lesson from these stories is that true worth is never defined by the validation of those who choose to diminish us. Betrayal by family, while painful, often acts as a catalyst for profound personal evolution, stripping away the illusion of obligation to reveal the strength of one's own character. By setting firm boundaries and refusing to settle for less than respect, we transform from victims of circumstance into architects of our own destiny. True family is not merely a matter of blood, but of those who choose to show up with genuine love and unwavering support.